Chapter 1516. Untitled. Did Princess Jun Wuxia bring the fish? Feng Wu asked again. The Empress Dowager was only half conscious, so she replied to Feng Wu's question. She cooked it herself? It tasted awful. Feng Wu didn't say a word. Emperor Wu looked at Feng Wu. Was there something wrong with the fish? Feng Wu cleared her throat. Emperor Wu stared at her. Was it because of the roast fish? Feng Wu said, that's right. The roast fish wasn't very clean. That was an understatement. Feng Wu had actually been the one to put the tickling powder on the fish, but she never expected the fish to end up in the Empress Dowager's hands. It wasn't clean. How dare she do that, giving Her Majesty unclean food? Bring the princess here. Emperor Wu was obviously infuriated. Feng Wu and Feng Sun exchanged conflicted looks. Poor Jun Wuxia. She had no idea that she was in a lot of trouble. Right now, she was talking to Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zhua. Feng Wu's roast fish? It tasted awful. She rolled her eyes. Mrs. Zhua said, are you sure? Feng Sun and Xian Yi were fighting over it. How can it not taste good? Jun Wuxia said, heh. I tried it myself, and I can tell good food from bad, okay? Both Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zhua gave her strange looks. Jun Wuxia flared up. Hey, what's with those looks? What kind of person do you think I am? Don't assume things. I'm telling you, even Her Majesty didn't like her roast fish. She put it down after just a few bites. Mrs. Zhua and Mrs. Dugu still looked unconvinced. They had talked to Her Majesty before and saw how excited the old lady had been when she thought that they had brought her the fish. Feeling wronged, Jun Wuxia lost her temper. But before she could do anything, Master Bai, the eunuch serving Emperor Wu, arrived. Your Royal Highness, His Majesty wants to see you. Master Bai's tone was very calm, but one could tell that there was an anxious look in his eyes. But Jun Wuxia didn't notice. She asked excitedly, does my father want to see me? Great. I was planning to go and see His Majesty just now. She was convinced of the happy notion that she was the Emperor's favorite daughter. Otherwise, why would he want to see only her? Seeing how happy Jun Wuxia was, Master Bai said hesitantly, Your Royal Highness, actually. Jun Wuxia had no idea what Master Bai was trying to tell her. She patted him on the shoulder and smiled. Bai, take this gold ring as a reward. Don't worry. There's more to come. Master Bai said, Your Royal Highness, actually, it's Her Majesty. Jun Wuxia was thrilled. She wondered if the Empress Dowager had remembered how considerate Jun Wuxia had been to bring her the food, and had told Jun Wuxia's father about it. The more she thought about it, the more excited she became. Looking into Master Bai's eyes, she asked, Where's my father? Bai, tell me, where is His Majesty? His Majesty is with Her Majesty the Empress Dowager, and he couldn't wait to flog Jun Wuxia. Chapter 1517. Untitled. However, Jun Wuxia was too excited to notice Master Bai's awkward expression, and she dashed off, moving as effortlessly as a happy butterfly. Master Bai shook his head and heaved a long sigh as he watched her scamper off. My dear princess, I hope you're strong enough to take it, he thought. Jun Wuxia rushed into the Empress Dowager's tent excitedly. Father, did you want to see me? Laksu held up the curtain for Jun Wuxia when she saw her coming. However, Jun Wuxia only heard a furious voice. Kneel. The sound was like a thunderclap in Jun Wuxia's ears. Frightened, she stood there in bewilderment and stared at Emperor Wu in disbelief. Father, Jun Wuxia sounded scared, because she really was terrified. Emperor Wu glared at her. Kneel. No. He sounded so fierce, he had never spoken to her like this before. Jun Wuxia immediately burst into tears. Emperor Wu had a lot of daughters but only one mother. Needless to say, they didn't mean the same to him. Make her kneel, Emperor Wu bellowed. Jun Wuxia was dumbfounded. She even forgot to cry. Raising her head, she stared at Emperor Wu in bewilderment. There was no expression on her face, as if she had really been struck by lightning. Make her kneel. Make her kneel. Those words kept replaying in her head. Emperor Wu had quite a few guards around him, and two of them stepped out. One grabbed Jun Wuxia's arm, while the other one pressed her down. Thump. Poor Jun Wuxia. She was forced to drop to her knees. Father! Jun Wuxia finally realized what was happening. She burst into tears, crawled toward Emperor Wu on all fours, and cried loudly as she wrapped her arms around his thigh. Father, Father, why are you doing this to me? Father, what did I do? Jun Wuxia cried so sadly and looked heartbroken. Emperor Wu pitied her for a second or two, but when he thought about his bedridden mother, he flared up again. He stared at Jun Wuxia. Did you bring Her Majesty the roast fish? Jun Wuxia was perplexed, but she still nodded. Emperor Wu asked, did you cook it yourself? Jun Wuxia felt conflicted. Of course the answer was no, but she had already told the Empress Dowager that she had cooked the fish herself. Was there something wrong with it? That shouldn't be the case. What could possibly be wrong with the fish? If she admitted now that she hadn't roasted the fish herself, it would damage the Empress Dowager's trust in her. Did you roast it yourself or not? Emperor Wu glared at her. I roasted it myself, Jun Wuxia acknowledged it. You roasted the fish, brought it here, and fed it to Her Majesty, all by yourself? Emperor Wu looked into Jun Wuxia's eyes. Jun Wuxia said, yes. Slap. Emperor Wu slapped her in the face. How dare you? Blood oozed out from the corner of her mouth, and she was dumbfounded. Father! How dare you try to harm Her Majesty? Why did you do it? Speak. Emperor Wu's eyes were bloodshot red. It pained him to see the way the Empress Dowager lay weakly in bed. Chapter 1518, Untitled. Jun Wuxia felt wronged and perplexed, and she burst into tears. Father, it wasn't me. Why would I do such a thing? All I've ever wanted to do is please Her Majesty. I would never harm her. Father. You didn't try to harm Her Majesty? Emperor Wu smirked. You roasted the fish, you brought it here, and you fed it to Her Majesty. But now, you're saying that you didn't do anything? Jun Wuxia, I've indulged you too much, and you've forgotten how to behave yourself. How dare you do this to Her Majesty? Jun Wuxia was really terrified now. She shook her head as she cried. No. Father, I didn't do that. I really didn't. I didn't roast the fish. That's right. I didn't cook it myself. Emperor Wu was so angry that he laughed. Now that something has gone wrong, you're saying that you didn't roast the fish? So, tell me who cooked it. She did. Jun Wuxia pointed at Feng Wu. Immediately, all eyes were on Feng Wu. Feng Wu was too good an actress for Jun Wuxia to handle. She was a professional. There was the most innocent look on Feng Wu's stunning face. She shrugged and looked confused. Your Royal Highness, I've been trying my best to stay out of your way these days, fearing that I may upset you. But I really didn't see this coming. I'm trying to stay as far away from you as possible, but you're still blaming it on me. Feng Wu's tears came very fast. She cried so prettily, and together with her stunning beauty, it was heartbreaking to see her like this. Compared with her, Jun Wuxia was howling like an animal. Jun Wuxia was very easily agitated, and she was infuriated by what Feng Wu said. She was the child of Empress Dugu and Emperor Wu's favorite daughter. She had never felt so mistreated before. Springing to her feet, she jumped at Feng Wu. Feng Wu, you set me up. I'm gonna kill you. She tried to grab Feng Wu's hair. Feng Wu had been standing next to Jun Linyuan, and 100 Jun Wuxias put together wouldn't be able to threaten Feng Wu if she hid behind Jun Linyuan. However, since Jun Wuxia said that Feng Wu had set her up, Feng Wu decided to give her what she wanted. Feng Wu acted as if she was frightened, and she quickly hid behind Emperor Wu. What she didn't notice was that when she ran behind Emperor Wu, someone else's extended hand froze in midair. He stared at Feng Wu with cold, furious eyes. Jun Wuxia was so infuriated that she could no longer think straight. She charged at Feng Wu, waving her arms and ignoring who was in the way. When Feng Wu hid behind Emperor Wu, Jun Wuxia flung herself into Emperor Wu's arms. Jun Wuxia's weapon was her nails. They would suddenly grow very long and sharp when she lost her temper. Her long, sharp nails slashed across Emperor Wu's cheeks. Poor Emperor Wu was caught off guard. If he had been vigilant, there was no way Jun Wuxia could have hurt him. Blood sprayed from his cheeks. Emperor Wu was dumbfounded. So was the crowd. Everyone stared at Jun Wuxia in astonishment. Those scratches? Jun Wuxia was in so much trouble. Chapter 1519. Untitled. However, Jun Wuxia was still in a frenzied state and had no idea that she had injured Emperor Wu. She was behaving like a madwoman. Feng Wu, stop hiding behind other people. Come out. I'm gonna kill you. Come out right now. Jun Wuxia kicked and screamed like a crazy person. Emperor Wu was so furious that he shook. Someone. Emperor Wu bellowed. Take the princess down. Immediately, two stalwart men stepped out. They each took one of Jun Wuxia's arms and pressed her down until she was on her knees. Hasty footsteps came from outside. Seeing that things were going south, Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zhua had gone to fetch Empress Dugu to save the day. Empress Dugu arrived to find the mad Jun Wuxia kneeling on the ground. She then saw Emperor Wu, whose cheeks was still bleeding, and the unscathed Feng Wu and Jun Wuxia. She wanted to run to Jun Wuxia's side immediately, but she was more sensible than that and knew that Emperor Wu was more important. Your Majesty. Taking Emperor Wu's hand, Empress Dugu was heartbroken. She then shouted, Doctor? Where's the doctor? Master Chu was away, but luckily, the eunuch was around. Bai hurried into the tent with a medical kit, but Emperor Wu stopped him. He walked up to Jun Wuxia and looked at her in frustration and disappointment. Jun Wuxia, when did you become so unruly? Emperor Wu was furious. Not only did you poison Her Majesty, you injured me as well. How dare you? Jun Wuxia had calmed down a little, but she was still very angry. Feeling wronged, she said stubbornly, I didn't poison Her Majesty. I didn't. Empress Dugu interjected and said softly, Your Majesty, you watched Wuxia grow up and she has always been a good girl. She wouldn't have changed so drastically. Your Majesty, Empress Dugu had always been very gentle around Emperor Wu. Taking his hand, she said, Has there been a mistake? Should we give her a chance to explain herself? Your Majesty. Emperor Wu gave in to Empress Dugu's soft voice and gradually calmed down as she spoke. He glared at Jun Wuxia. Fine. I'll give you a chance. Jun Wuxia bit her lower lip. Feng Wu gave me the roast fish, and she put the poison in it. She's the real culprit. I'm not lying. Wait, I wasn't alone. My fifth sister was with me. Feng Wu gave her a roast fish too. Immediately, everyone gave Feng Wu strange looks. Empress Dugu stared at Feng Wu in a provoking manner. Emperor Wu narrowed his eyes and glared at Feng Wu like a viper. If Feng Wu really was the culprit, recalling how harmless she appeared, Emperor Wu felt like tearing her to pieces. Bring the fifth princess here. Emperor Wu kept his gaze on Feng Wu, his eyes glinting coldly. Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zhua exchanged excited looks. They were convinced that Feng Wu had cooked the fish, because that was what Jun Wuxia told them. Emperor Wu stared at Jun Wuxia. If Feng Wu gave you the roast fish, why did you insist earlier that you cooks? Chapter 1520, Innocence, 1. Biting her lower lip, Jun Wuxia said in a pitiful voice, I didn't know that the fish had been tampered with, and I was trying to give it to Her Majesty to please her. I thought Her Majesty would like me if she thought I cooked it. But I didn't know Feng Wu could be so malicious. Jun Wuxia stared at Feng Wu with hatred in her eyes. She was determined to destroy Feng Wu today. Jun Wuxia, Empress Dugu, Mrs. Dugu, and Mrs. Zhua had formed an alliance to fight Feng Wu. Any other young woman would have surrendered by now, but Feng Wu wasn't just any young woman. She didn't panic, nor did she look shaken. The fifth princess is here. The fifth princess had always been a timid girl. When she saw a big crowd inside, she immediately paled. Father. She dropped to her knees, lowered her head, and looked terrified. Emperor Wu had never liked this timid daughter, so he felt very impatient as soon as he saw her. But he still controlled his temper and stared at the fifth princess with cold eyes. Jun Wuxia told her sister loudly, "Sister, tell father that we didn't roast the fish ourselves, did we?" Despite her timid appearance, in fact no one knew that the fifth princess wasn't what she appeared to be. 1,000 ideas flashed through her mind. She wasn't stupid, of course she knew that Jun Wuxia was the one who made her fall down. But looking from Jun Wuxia to Empress Dugu, she had to admit that she still couldn't afford to offend her older sister now. After weighing the pros and cons, the fifth princess remained as timid as ever and said gingerly, "Father, my sister and I really didn't cook the fish ourselves. Miss Feng Wu gave them to us." Wow! Immediately, all eyes were on Feng Wu again. But the way they looked at her had changed. If that was the truth, Jun Wuxia had lied to the Empress Dowager at most, but Feng Wu, forget Feng Wu, the entire Feng clan would go down with her. "Father," the fifth princess added, "I dropped my fish and it got dirty, but it's still there. I can go fetch it and show it to you." She looked up and gave Feng Wu an apologetic glance when she said that. She felt sorry that she still had to take Jun Wuxia's side for now. Hearing that the fifth princess had evidence, Empress Dugu was elated. She said excitedly, "Your Majesty, can I go get it?" Emperor Wu waved his hand at the chief steward. "You go. Be quick about it." The chief steward nodded and quickly left. He came back with the roast fish soon afterward. It was indeed covered in dirt, but it was still intact. What was left of Jun Wuxia's fish was brought in as well. Immediately, all eyes were on Feng Wu, and everyone wondered what further explanation she could give now. Gritting his teeth, Feng Sun wanted to step out. But Feng Wu grabbed his sleeve and shook her head at him. Feng Sun said, "But..." Feng Wu said, "Don't worry. I have a plan." Feng Sun said, "Are you sure?" Feng Wu nodded. "But you need to do something for me." She then whispered something in Feng Sun's ear. Chapter 1521, Innocence 2. Feng Sun asked, "Will that be enough?" Feng Wu said, "Yes, that'll do. Go now, and don't let other people notice you." Feng Sun said, "All right." Feng Sun slipped away when all eyes were on Feng Wu without bringing any attention to himself. Meanwhile, Emperor Wu was questioning Feng Wu. Were they telling the truth? Feng Wu walked up to Emperor Wu and knelt down. "Your Majesty, I didn't do it." Emperor Wu looked calmly at Feng Wu. Feng Wu was equally calm. She pointed at the 2 roast fish on the table and said quietly, "Your Majesty, I swear to God that I didn't roast these 2 fish. If I lie about any of this, may God take all my cultivation ability." That was a rather impressive declaration. Mrs. Wu's eyes flickered. "Feng Wu, aren't you afraid that your oath will come true?" Feng Wu said calmly, "I'm not." Mrs. Wu said, "Admit what you've done now." Feng Wu still said calmly, "I'll never admit to things I haven't done, nor can anyone force me to." Mrs. Wu was furious. "You've done a terrible thing, but you're denying it." Feng Wu asked, "Where's your proof?" Mrs. Wu said, "The princesses are witnesses, and the 2 fish are the evidence. There's your proof. How dare you deny it?" Feng Wu smiled at Mrs. Wu. "If that proof is solid, His Majesty would have punished me already, and not just questioned me." Mrs. Wu said, "Phew." Feng Wu turned to look at Emperor Wu, who was staring at her with a livid face and brooding eyes. And he wasn't the only one who looked like that. Many people there doubted Feng Wu. The 2 princesses both said the same thing, and Feng Wu was indeed the only one who had been roasting moonfish. Feng Wu was still smiling. "Your Majesty, I can prove my innocence." Prove her innocence? Everyone looked at her curiously and wondered how she was going to do it. Emperor Wu's eyes flickered as well. "Prove your innocence? What are you going to prove?" Feng Wu smiled. "Princess Jun Wuxia said that I roasted those fish, so I'm going to prove that I definitely didn't." Wait. Everyone was intrigued. Was that doable? How is she going to do that? Does she have some sort of visual record of herself roasting her fish? If not, how can she prove it? Everyone was confused. Even Emperor Wu gave Feng Wu a strange look. How are you going to do that? Feng Wu smiled mildly. With my capability, of course. She then raised her right hand and snapped her fingers. At that moment, the door curtain was lifted, and Feng Sun walked in. He was holding something in his hands. Those are... Everyone was surprised to see the things in his hands. It's the grill and the moon fish. Feng Wu looked at Emperor Wu. Your Majesty, please allow me to prove my innocence. Emperor Wu couldn't believe his ears. So, you're going to prove your innocence by roasting fish? Everyone else found that idea idiotic as well. Feng Wu nodded calmly. That's right. Jun Wuxia almost burst out laughing. What an idiot. Chapter 1522, Innocence 3. How different could the fish taste? Would she actually be able to make it into something else? Emperor Wu thought the same. Staring at Feng Wu, he asked, Are you sure you'll be able to prove your innocence this way? Feng Wu nodded solemnly. Definitely. However, no one believed her. Therefore, many people shook their heads, including Emperor Wu. People like Empress Dugu and Mrs. Swa even gloated at Feng Wu's predicament. Mrs. Swa murmured, I was wondering how she was going to do it. What an idiotic way. How different could one roast fish be from another? Moreover, the standard would be very subjective. However, Feng Wu ignored all the looks they gave her and even looked up at Emperor Wu. She asked, Your Majesty, should I do it here or take it outside? Emperor Wu only stared at Feng Wu as if he was looking at a dead person. Jun Linyuan spoke at that moment. Right here. That was all he said, but his tone was very domineering. Emperor Wu stared at Jun Linyuan, and there was no warmth in his eyes. Jun Linyuan wasn't affected at all. He didn't even look at Emperor Wu. Emperor Wu was frustrated. Feng Wu didn't want to go out either, because it would complicate the explanation. Hence, she set up the grill and put the seasoned fish on top. At first, everyone frowned. Feng Wu was so bold. How could she possibly dare to roast fish in front of His Majesty? Emperor Wu frowned as well, because he felt offended. However, as time went by, sizzled that when Feng Wu activated her formation, the first hint of the aroma wafted up in the air. Hey, what's that smell? Why is it so nice? Their attitudes toward Feng Wu began to change. But she was just getting started. 3 minutes later, they smelled another aroma. It was even stronger than the previous one. OMG. The less steadfast ones already began to feel their mouths water. Even Mrs. Zhua, who was firmly against Feng Wu, couldn't help but swallow. Seeing their reactions, Feng Sun put his hands behind his back and proudly stuck out his chest. They now knew why he and Xian Yi would fight over a piece of fish, because it tasted like nothing else. No one but Feng Wu could make something like this. The fish would be ready to serve now if Feng Wu had been cooking for Feng Sun and Xian Yi, but she decided to show these people her true capability. Hence, 3 minutes later, the dense spiritual essence doubled again. She could hear people swallowing around her. They were all staring at Feng Wu eagerly. Feng Wu smiled a little and sped up. When the last bit of the thick aroma filled the air, Feng Wu put out the fire with a wave of her hand. A glossy, golden roast fish was presented to the crowd. Emperor Wu wanted to act unperturbed and indifferent, but he couldn't control his appetite. He swallowed. People like Empress Dugu and Jun Wuxia were filled with hatred toward Feng Wu. However, when the aroma filled the tent, they started to swallow uncontrollably. Feng Wu looked up and glanced at them. Chapter 1523, Innocence 4. How humiliating. Jun Wuxia didn't dare to even move a muscle. It's just a roast fish. Big deal. But at that moment, someone walked into the tent. It was none other than the Empress Dowager herself. Your Majesty, please go back and lie down. Granny Lan was almost in tears. Feng Wu had tended to the Empress Dowager already and had written her a prescription. However, the old lady had wandered off when Granny Lan went to prepare the concoction. Following the aroma, she saw the Empress Dowager, who was hovering outside the tent. The Empress Dowager threw Granny Lan's hands off and cast a stern look at her. "Go away." After pushing Granny Lan away, the Empress Dowager quickly walked toward Feng Wu. The others had already turned around when Granny Lan addressed the Empress Dowager, and all they saw was the haggard old lady walking in without her outer robe. The Empress Dowager was always properly dressed and very tidy, but now she was unbelievably casual. "Mother." Emperor Wu rushed over toward his mother and held her hand. But the Empress Dowager only pushed him away. She headed straight for Feng Wu. To be more precise, she was running toward the roast fish. She was attracted by the aroma, but when she saw the roast fish, she looked disappointed. Roast fish? She had tried it before and didn't think much of it. However, after taking a few steps in the opposite direction, the Empress Dowager stopped, turned around, and stared at the fish again. Her gaze was glued to the fish. That was to say, although she was standing in front of Feng Wu, she didn't know that it was the girl who was roasting the fish. Everyone around them looked at Her Majesty in bewilderment. This childish old lady was in stark contrast to the graceful Empress Dowager they knew. She stood in front of the grill and her hands reached out. She then drew them back, before reaching out again. Emperor Wu was about to go to her, when Feng Wu said quietly, "Her Majesty is in a dreamlike state now. In other words, Her Majesty is sleepwalking." All eyes were on her. Putting her hands behind her back, Feng Wu said calmly, "If someone wakes Her Majesty up now, it's very likely that she'll be very confused. In layman terms, she'll become mentally crippled." Wow! Immediately, everyone held their breaths. Some even covered their mouths with their hands, worried that their breathing might disturb the old lady. "What are we going to do now?" Emperor Wu didn't realize that he was whispering in Feng Wu's ear. Feng Wu said quietly, "It's quite easy actually. Don't disturb Her Majesty, and let her do whatever she wants. Once the obsession is over, we'll be able to guide her toward going to sleep." Sure. Emperor Wu obeyed Feng Wu's instruction. Meanwhile, the Empress Dowager, she couldn't see anything but the roast fish. Finally, she couldn't suppress her desire anymore and picked up the fish. She gently tore a small piece off and slowly put it in her mouth. She looked very hesitant. She thought she knew what the roast fish tasted like, but she didn't know why she felt so tempted, which was why she looked distracted. However, when she put the first piece into her mouth. Chapter 1524, Innocence 5. Everyone looked at the old lady. The roast fish simply smelled so nice that they all wanted to grab it and stuff it into their mouths, therefore, they were eager to see how the Empress Dowager would react. But the Empress Dowager was a little slow to do so. She chewed slowly. She frowned at first. The others were intrigued by that frown. Especially people like Mrs. Zhua, who were thrilled. Was it bad? Awful. However, 3 seconds later, the Empress Dowager looked more and more surprised. In the end, she seemed astonished. And her eyes widened as well. The others found it hard to understand, because thought it was just a roast fish. What could be so astonishing about it? However, the next second, everyone watched as the Empress Dowager rushed toward the grill despite her clumsy movements. She then picked up the fish with both hands the way one would hold a baby. Wow! She then took a very large bite. Right after that, everyone watched as the supposedly graceful Empress Dowager gnawed on the fish like a crazy person. She reminded the others of a zombie biting a human being. She was so excited that she looked completely crazy. "Mother!" Emperor Wu couldn't bring himself to watch anymore, but before he could walk up to his mother, Feng Wu gave him an indifferent glance. He immediately stopped. "Is Her Majesty really going to be all right like this?" Emperor Wu asked anxiously. Feng Wu waved grumpily. "She's just a bit ravenous, that's all. Plus, moonfish doesn't have many bones. What can possibly go wrong?" Seeing the way the Empress Dowager wolfed down the fish, Jun Wuxia had a bad feeling. That didn't seem right. Didn't the Empress Dowager find the roast fish awful before? Why was she? Could it be possible that there was something different with Feng Wu's roast fish? Feng Wu, what did you put in it? Why is Her Majesty like this? Empress Dugu couldn't take it anymore and asked in a harsh tone. Feng Wu glanced at her and said indifferently, "Nothing, really. I just added some mustard grass." Empress Dugu asked, "What's mustard grass? What does it do?" Feng Wu said, "Not much, but it can relieve Her Majesty's itching." Empress Dugu said, "You?" Feng Wu smiled mildly and told Feng Sun, "I roasted 2 fish just then. Since Her Majesty won't let go of hers, just cut up the other one and let everyone try it." Sure. The proud young Lord Feng always listened to Feng Wu. Feng Wu decided to let the others see what the fish was like for themselves. However, that Mrs. Swa waved her hands. "I'm not eating that thing. I won't." Feng Sun's face darkened a little. No one was forcing her. Mrs. Dugu waved her hands as well. "No, I'm not eating it." Feng Sun was rendered speechless. But it wasn't the case with the others. No one was strong enough to resist the tempting aroma, and they all took a piece. Take Master Bai, the physician, for example. He only planned to take a small bite, but he couldn't stop after the first bite. He kept stuffing more fish into his mouth. Chapter 1525. Innocence 6. It was simply so delicious. He had never tried anything so wonderful before. Master Bai wasn't the only one. Other people reacted the same way. Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Swa looked at one another, and both seemed surprised. What was wrong with these people? Why did they look like they had just taken opium and lost their minds? Feng Sun gave everyone Feng Wu's fish first before giving them the fish which the 5th princess had brought in. Oh God! What the hell is that? After tasting Feng Wu's roast fish, they couldn't stand something that was so subpar. It wasn't just worse. It was a polar opposite to what Feng Wu made. How can they possibly have been made by the same person? They definitely didn't come from the same cook. Feng Wu is such an amazing cook. How can this horrible fish be her work? Hearing the comments, Feng Wu knew that she had almost succeeded. She turned to Emperor Wu and asked confidently, "Your Majesty, have you tasted the difference?" She had already removed the tickling powder from the 5th princess's fish, and she was determined to show other people the difference. Emperor Wu felt very conflicted. He wasn't an idiot, so of course he could taste the difference. Because of that, he couldn't help Jun Wuxia even if he wanted to. Emperor Wu stared at Jun Wuxia with a stern look on his face and wouldn't say a word. But everyone could tell that a storm was coming. "What else do you have to say for yourself now?" Emperor Wu stared at Jun Wuxia, looking very intimidating. Jun Wuxia had also tasted the fish roasted by Feng Wu, so she knew how different the two were. "Father, it wasn't me. I really didn't roast the fish. I didn't." Emperor Wu snorted. "If you didn't, who did?" "I have no idea." "You don't? Didn't you just say that Feng Wu was the one who roasted the fish, but now you're saying that you don't know?" Emperor Wu pressed on. With everything that had happened, Jun Wuxia no longer dared to blame Feng Wu. After all, Feng Wu had just proven her innocence with her own talent. "I thought it was Feng Wu before who roasted it, but it turns out that she's not the culprit. So, it has to be someone else." Jun Wuxia's voice trailed off. She hadn't mentioned Feng Sun's name so far, because she knew that if she gave Feng Sun up, nothing could ever happen between the two of them after this. Feng Sun would never forgive her. "You're full of lies. A princess like you is a humiliation to the Junwo Empire. Take her down. I'm going to remove her title and make her a commoner." Your Majesty, Father." Jun Wuxia finally panicked. She rushed up to Emperor Wu, wrapped her arms around his thigh, and burst into tears. Father, please don't. I remember now. It was Feng Sun. Feng Sun gave us those fish." Jun Wuxia finally made the choice between her title and her love. Immediately, everyone gave Feng Sun strange looks. They didn't expect him to be implicated. But Feng Sun was very calm. Emperor Wu stared at Jun Wuxia. Are you telling the truth? Chapter 1526, Untitled. Jun Wuxia said, It's true. I'm telling the truth. I swear it. Father, you can ask my sister if you don't believe me. Emperor Wu stared at the fifth princess. The younger princess was thrilled when she heard that Jun Wuxia was going to lose her title and become a commoner. However, that she wasn't happy for too long before she realized something. With Empress Dugu and Emperor Wu's favor, Jun Wuxia would never become a commoner. Therefore, the fifth princess still had to play the good girl and take Jun Wuxia's side. Therefore, Father, young Lord Feng did give us the fish, but Feng Wu was roasting some fish herself, so we just thought that she had cooked those as well. I didn't realize that we misunderstood. She then bowed at Feng Wu and said gently, It was all our fault that Miss Feng Wu was falsely accused. Please accept our apology. Feng Wu only glanced at her. Everyone only thought of Jun Wuyu, the fifth princess, as this timid girl, and underestimated her. However, Feng Wu smiled a little. Not only was Jun Wuyu very observant, she could also adjust her strategy accordingly. She could adapt to the situation and was a great actress as well. With someone like this around her, Jun Wuxia would have a very hard time in the future. Feng Wu decided that she would leave the enemy to deal with Jun Wuxia and wouldn't meddle. My princess, you flatter me. Don't worry about it. Feng Wu smiled. Emperor Wu stared at Jun Wuxia. Come over here and apologize to Feng Wu. Apologize to Feng Wu. Jun Wuxia's rebellious side instantly flared up. However, Empress Dugu kept giving her warning glances. With the current situation, if she still wouldn't let go of her pride, Emperor Wu would dislike her even more. But for Jun Wuxia, apologizing to Feng Wu was worse than death. Feng Sun did give us the fish, but who gave it to him? Was it really not Feng Wu? Clenching her fists, Jun Wuxia asked another question. Are you an idiot? Jun Wuyu thought, wanting to smack her sister on the head. Feng Wu had proven her innocence to everyone with her absolute talent. There was no question of it. Why would Jun Wuxia still try to blame it on Feng Wu? Was she really an idiot now? Emperor Wu stared at Feng Sun. I'm going to give you a chance to explain yourself. Jun Linyuan was just about the only one who didn't feel intimidated by Emperor Wu's authority. Feng Sun was no exception. However, he bowed to the emperor and said calmly, Your Majesty, I ran across those fish and picked them up off the ground. Emperor Wu asked, You picked them up? Everyone gave Feng Sun and Jun Wuxia strange looks. Feng Sun said, Your Majesty, I was walking past a thick growth of grass and found the fish just lying there. Since it was very close to the campsite, I was worried that they would smell, so I thought I should throw them further away. But to my surprise, he turned around and looked at Jun Wuxia. The princess held my arm and begged me to give them to her, saying that she wanted to eat them. Jun Wuxia was astonished. Feng Sun looked distressed. Since the fish had been on the ground, how could I give it to the princess? Naturally, I said no. But the princess wouldn't let go of my arm. She begged and even cried. Feng Sun heaved a long sigh. I really had no other choice because the princess was just... I couldn't turn her down. The crowd now looked at Jun Wuxia strangely. Chapter 1527, Cry Out, 1. Everyone had heard about Jun Wuxia's crush on Feng Sun. The fact that she was head over heels in love with him was public knowledge. Therefore, everyone believed what Feng Sun said. However, Jun Wuxia yelled, Feng Sun, you're lying. That's just a load of crap. Feng Sun gave her an awkward look. Your Royal Highness, I told you then that I found the fish on the ground and it wasn't edible, and what did you say? You said that you would throw it away for me. However, Feng Sun's tone changed, and he stared at Jun Wuxia in disbelief. How could you give something you were supposed to throw away to Her Majesty? That was a very serious accusation. It suggested that Jun Wuxia was deliberately trying to harm the Empress Dowager. Immediately, everyone stared at her in disbelief. Jun Wuxia was too shocked to speak as well. She had no idea how to refute Feng Sun and could only shake her head repeatedly. No, it wasn't like that. You're lying. Feng Sun spoke in a sorry tone as he stared at her. Your Royal Highness, you knew perfectly well that I was the one who gave you the roast fish, but you tried to blame Feng Wu first, and when you saw that it wasn't going to work, you tried to frame me instead. But the truth is that you knew all along that the fish was found on the side of the road and wasn't clean. How could you let Her Majesty eat it? Did you think you can use Her Majesty's power to kill Feng Wu? My princess, I'm so disappointed in you. Jun Wuxia was astonished. Feng Sun then turned to Emperor Wu and said solemnly, Your Majesty, I'm telling nothing but the truth. I swear. Jun Wuxia shrieked, No. It wasn't like that. You're lying. Feng Sun stared at her. How was that a lie? Jun Wuxia shouted, You lied about finding the fish by the side of the road. Feng Wu might still be the actual cook. Feng Sun said, Your Royal Highness, why won't you just admit it? You've seen how well Feng Wu can cook. How can she possibly make something like this? Jun Wuxia said, In that case, maybe you roasted the fish. Now that her interests were concerned, she didn't care about Feng Sun anymore. Feng Sun stared at her in disbelief. I roasted the fish? With someone like Feng Wu around, why would I do such a thing? Are you even listening to yourself? Jun Wuxia was speechless. She had completely run out of excuses. Nothing she said seemed to work, and her words only incriminated her further. Staring at Jun Wuxia, Emperor Wu was furious. How could he have such a stupid daughter? Jun Wuxia was still yelling. How good can Feng Wu's roast fish be? It's nothing out of the ordinary. The others all gave her strange looks. Nothing out of the ordinary. It just so happened that, oh no. Feng Sun suddenly cried out in surprise. Everyone turned to look at him. Sorry, Your Majesty. As soon as Feng Sun sat down, the others heard a faint buzzing sound. That was that they all stared at Feng Sun in disbelief. He was about to make a breakthrough. Emperor Wu was surprised as well. What a coincidence. Chapter 1528, Cry Out 2. It's because of the roast fish, Xianyi explained. The fish contains a special kind of spiritual essence that can trigger breakthroughs. Mrs. Wu snorted. Young Lord Sun, I see that you're on Feng Wu's side. That's just preposterous. You're trying to give all the credit to Feng Wu. She wasn't the only one who wouldn't believe it. No one in the tent would. They all admitted that Feng Wu was a great cook, but there was no way that some delicious food could lead to a breakthrough. That's just outrageous. I can't believe that young Lord Xian would tell a lie like that. It seems that he and Feng Wu are very close. What he said is impossible. A breakthrough? Don't make me laugh. Jun Wuxia almost burst out laughing. Xian Yi might think he's doing Feng Wu a favor, but he isn't helping her at all. This is going to seriously undermine my father's impression of Feng Wu, she thought. As expected, when she stole a glance at Emperor Wu, she saw that his eyes were as black as bottomless pools. Jun Wuxia and Empress Dugu looked at each other, and both saw satisfaction in each other's eyes. But before they realized it, something flickered in Xian Yi's eyes. Lifting the lower hem of his robe, he sat down on the ground after apologizing to Emperor Wu. It was exactly the same as what Feng Sun had done. Everyone stared at Xian Yi in bewilderment. What was he doing? I ate too much fish. Please give me a moment. Xian Yi closed his eyes after that. Rumble that a few seconds later, everyone heard the sound of a breakthrough. They couldn't believe their ears. He ate too much and needed a moment. So, he was speeding up his digestion by having a breakthrough? That was unbelievable. However, it was the truth. After Feng Sun, Xian Yi made a breakthrough as well. Everyone held their breaths and looked shocked. Is it possible that their breakthroughs have something to do with the roast fish? Can the fish be that extraordinary? It's just roast fish. Maybe Feng Sun and Xian Yi have been suppressing their breakthroughs until now. Are you sure? I don't think so. Then how do you explain the fact that they're the only ones who have made breakthroughs? I'll believe it if someone else who has eaten the fish makes a breakthrough now. That's right. Feng Sun and Xian Yi just aren't convincing enough. They were still hesitating when all of a sudden. Wait a minute. Someone in the crowd cried out. They all turned to look. It was none other than Master Bai, the physician himself. Pressing a hand to his danton, Master Bai stared at Feng Wu in disbelief. Feng Sun and Xian Yi were sitting side by side. Just then, Master Bai quickly walked up to them and sat down next to Xian Yi. He then apologized to Emperor Wu. Your Majesty, sorry about this. As soon as he said that, a buzzing sound filled the air. The rest of the crowd was astonished. People like Mrs. Swa had been talking about how Feng Sun's and Xian Yi's breakthroughs weren't convincing enough, but they had to face the truth now. Oh God! Master Bai is making a breakthrough. Oh my God! I can't believe this. That's so frightening. Feng Wu's food can help with our cultivation. Emperor Wu was shocked. Empress Dugu was shocked. So was Jun Wuxia. And everyone else. Chapter 1529. The Surprising Empress Dowager, 1. How could they not be surprised? After what happened to Master Bai, everyone turned to look at Feng Wu. That was crazy. Something Feng Wu had casually cooked could help people with their breakthroughs? What did that mean? Emperor Wu stared at Feng Wu in disbelief, a lot of thoughts already running through his head. He took a deep breath. He really needed some time to calm down. Because it was such a big deal. No way. It has to be a coincidence. It has to be. Jun Wuxia shook her head resolutely. Feng Wu must have paid Master Bai off. That has to be it. Everyone found her words idiotic. How dumb could she be? Feng Wu was already sincere enough, trying to prove herself over and over again until she was practically shoving the evidence in Jun Wuxia's face. But Jun Wuxia acted like a fool and kept shaking her head, saying that she wouldn't believe it. Even Empress Dugu couldn't stand it anymore. She grabbed her daughter's hand and shook her head at her, warning her to keep her voice down. Where there is life, there is hope. Don't bluster so much. Be quiet. Empress Dugu warned Jun Wuxia in a low voice. But Jun Wuxia was so agitated now that she couldn't think straight anymore. All she knew was her hatred toward Feng Wu, and she wouldn't listen to anyone else. It's fake. They're faking it. It's just a show they're putting on. Looking around, Jun Wuxia suddenly rested her hands on her waist and guffawed. She then pointed at the Empress Dowager, who was still tearing at the roast fish, and said, Feng Wu, if you're that amazing after the amount of roast fish Her Majesty has eaten, why can't you make her have a breakthrough? If that happens, I'll kneel down and call you my great-grandmother. Everyone stared at her in disbelief. Kneel down and address Feng Wu as her great-grandmother? What was the princess thinking? If Feng Wu was her great-grandmother, she would become Emperor Wu's grandmother and the Empress Dowager's mother. Jun Wuxia had obviously lost her mind. Infuriated, Emperor Wu shouted, What a load of nonsense. Take her away now. But he was too late. The Empress Dowager was finally full. She rubbed her belly and burped. All would be fine if that was all she did. However, there was a rumbling sound when she burped. Rumbled that it was as long and melodious as the sound of a flute. Hearing that sound, everyone fell silent with astonishment. That was... wow. Shit. OMG. Did Her Majesty just... Everyone looked from the Empress Dowager to Feng Wu, then to Emperor Wu. Did Her Majesty just have a bowel movement? I think so. No, she didn't. Can't you see all the spiritual essence rushing toward Her Majesty? That's no bowel movement. That is to say, Her Majesty has. Can it be any more obvious? Her Majesty just had a breakthrough. Everyone then turned to look at Jun Wuxia in bewilderment. Only a minute had passed since Jun Wuxia said those words. Feng Wu, if you're that amazing after the amount of roast fish Her Majesty has eaten, why can't you make her have a breakthrough? If that happens, I'll kneel down and call you my great-grandmother. Chapter 1530. The Surprising Empress Dowager, 2. The princess just said. The princess just said that if Her Majesty can make a breakthrough, she'll kneel in front of Feng Wu and address her as her great-grandmother. What? Do that? Jun Wuxia was dumbfounded. She stood there in a trance-like state as if she had just been struck by lightning. Her brain seemed to have stopped working. Meanwhile, Emperor Wu turned around and stared at Jun Wuxia. If he could, he would smack her head off now. Seeing Emperor Wu's trembling right hand, Empress Dugu knew what he wanted to do. She immediately dropped to her knees. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. Her Majesty could really have just had a bowel movement. After all, she's still dreaming. Mrs. Zhuo also knelt to plead for Jun Wuxia. Your Majesty, the princess is still a child. Please don't mind what she said. Mrs. Dugu shoved Feng Wu and warned her in a low voice, say something for the princess right now. Do you think you can walk away unscathed if something happens to her? Unfortunately, Feng Wu didn't believe in threats. She might have given Jun Wuxia a hand if these people had spoken nicely, but they tried to threaten her instead. Wrong choice. Feng Wu acted as if she didn't hear her at all. Mrs. Dugu stared at Feng Wu with eyes filled with hatred and wanted to kill the girl right there and then. Since she couldn't persuade Feng Wu, she had to beg Emperor Wu instead. Your Majesty, from what I know, Her Majesty indeed only had a bowel movement. Please don't blame the princess for something she didn't do. A bowel movement. Those around them stared at the people of the Dugu family in amazement. If they had to lie, at least put more effort into it. They were lying through their teeth. That wasn't a bowel movement at all. A bowel movement? Do you take me for a fool? Emperor Wu pushed Empress Dugu away. Her Majesty just had a bowel movement. With everything that had happened, Jun Wuxia still insisted that the Empress Dowager hadn't made a breakthrough. Unless Her Majesty does it again, I'll never be convinced, even if Your Majesty kills me for it. Jun Wuxia spoke stubbornly as she knelt. She raised her chin, looking as proud as a swan. Lady Northern Feng had arrived when no one was looking, and she shook her head in resignation. Having such a princess was such a humiliation for the royal family. Emperor Wu probably felt the same way, because he kept pointing at Jun Wuxia with a trembling finger. After everything that has happened, you're still brazen enough to argue with me? Do you have any shame at all? Jun Wuxia, I was so wrong about you. This is your true self. I won't believe it. I won't. Unless Her Majesty. Before she could finish, the Empress Dowager farted, long and loud. Elated, Jun Wuxia looked up, her twinkling black eyes reminding one of stars in the sky. Father, listen. Did you hear that? That's a bowel movement, isn't it? Her Majesty is... However, she was still talking excitedly when she heard a slight rumbling sound. The spiritual essence gathered to once again wrap around the Empress Dowager. What? OMG. Is that what I think it is? Her Majesty is... Feng Wu really is incredible. Immediately, everyone stared at Feng Wu in disbelief, as if they had just seen God. Chapter 1531. The Surprising Empress Dowager, 3. If they could, they too wanted to kneel and call her their great-grandmother. Feng Wu was quite baffled herself until Feng Sun tugged her sleeve. His breakthrough was over, and he had returned to Feng Wu's side when she wasn't looking. He was now looking at her with a complicated emotion in his eyes. Xiao Wu, you're still ours, aren't you? Feng Wu rolled her eyes at him. What do you mean? Pressing his lips together, Feng Sun said more directly, do you know how many people will try to follow you around from now on? Do you know how popular you're going to become? Do you know how much Feng Yanfeng and his family will regret what they've done? So, you're still my sister, aren't you? Feng Sun studied Feng Wu's face carefully and tentatively asked for her opinion. Feng Wu was filled with emotion. Back in northern border city, Feng Sun had been friendly toward her, but still couldn't hide his sense of superiority. But now, he was asking gingerly if she was still his sister. She smacked Feng Sun's head and said grumpily, "What are you talking about? Of course I'm still your sister. Don't you want to be my brother anymore?" Feng Sun laughed in excitement. "Little Feng Wu is my sister. My sister is little Feng Wu." Feng Wu rolled her eyes at him and found him such a fool. However, those around them all gave Feng Sun envious looks. So that's why young Lord Feng has been making such rapid progress these days. That's right. Young Lord Feng isn't the only one. There's young Lord Xin as well. I bet they can enjoy Feng Wu's cooking all the time. Gosh, I envy them so much. The other people didn't hide their envious tones. At the same time, Mrs. Swa had never regretted a decision so much. She was stuck at a bottleneck herself. If she had accepted a piece of the roast fish, she might have made a breakthrough as well. Mrs. Dugu felt the same way. Meanwhile, Emperor Wu was also staring at Feng Wu with a strange look in his eyes. He looked from Feng Wu to Jun Linyuan. He finally understood why Jun Linyuan kept Feng Wu around him. Despite his reluctance, he had no choice but to admit it. He patted Jun Linyuan on the shoulder. "That was very thoughtful and prudent of you. I have to admit now that you're better at reading people than I am." Jun Linyuan only gave him an indifferent glance with his brooding eyes without saying a word. "If there's nothing else, you can all leave now." Putting his hands behind his back, Emperor Wu looked around the room. The emperor had spoken, so of course no one dared to linger. Jun Wuxia was the first to move. She had to stay here and she probably wouldn't be a princess anymore. However, Emperor Wu snorted. "Jun Wuxia, stop right there. Feng Wu and Jun Linyuan can stay. The rest of you can go now." Emperor Wu had made it very clear that Empress Dugu had no excuse to stay behind. She looked at Jun Wuxia with concern before she shot a wary glance at Feng Wu. Jun Wuxia was cornered even when the Empress was around. With her gone, the Empress wondered what her poor daughter would have to face. Chapter 1532, Untitled. Your Majesty, Empress Dugu had just started to speak, when Emperor Wu shook his head at her. "My Empress, please leave." With his dark face, he looked severe and authoritative. Empress Dugu knew Emperor Wu too well. Seeing that he was genuinely angry, she didn't dare say another word and backed down. Everyone else stayed away for fear of getting into trouble, but people like Empress Dugu and Mrs. Swa remained outside the tent and paced back and forth. Back in the tent, Emperor Wu stared at Jun Wuxia, and his brooding eyes reminded her of an eagle. Intimidated, Jun Wuxia stumbled back involuntarily. "You're a princess of the empire, but your behavior is odious." Emperor Wu looked from Jun Wuxia to Feng Wu, and he felt even more infuriated. He couldn't understand why he had such a foolish daughter. How unfair. Pursing her lips, Jun Wuxia wanted to say something, but she couldn't utter a word. Her eyes were filled with hatred when she glanced at Feng Wu out of the corner of her eye. "How dare you hold a grudge against Feng Wu?" Emperor Wu felt as if flames were burning in his chest, threatening to destroy everything. "Your mother begged me to forgive you, but you're just so stubborn and won't admit your mistake. Jun Wuxia, how dare you?" Emperor Wu pointed at Jun Wuxia and said, "Your title?" "Father." Jun Wuxia was finally scared. Because she saw the ruthless look in Emperor Wu's eyes and finally realized that if she continued with her willful behavior, she really would be stripped of her title. "Father." Jun Wuxia scrambled toward Emperor Wu on her knees and wrapped her arms around his thigh. "Father, it's all my fault. I'm just an ignorant girl, so please forgive me. I'm really sorry. Father." After all, they were father and daughter, and the bond was impossible to break. When Jun Wuxia acted tough and stubborn, Emperor Wu was so furious that he became very intimidating. Now that Jun Wuxia's attitude had softened, Emperor Wu relented as well when he saw the pitiful way she cried and pleaded with him. However, despite his feelings, Emperor Wu still kept his face straight, and he stared at Jun Wuxia. What good will just begging me do? Emperor Wu glanced in Feng Wu's direction. In a critical moment like this, Jun Wuxia suddenly became a lot smarter. She knew what her father meant. He was telling her to apologize to Feng Wu. But deep down, Jun Wuxia was very reluctant. She was a proper princess, and Empress Dugu was her mother, making her far more superior to other princesses. But now, she had to apologize to a commoner. But if she didn't apologize? Clenching her fists and grinding her teeth, Jun Wuxia shook from head to toe. She slowly walked over to Feng Wu and gave a deep bow. "I'm sorry." There, she finally said it. She burst into tears as soon as she spoke before she turned around and ran out. She moved too fast for anyone to stop her. Now that she had apologized, Emperor Wu didn't know what to do with her after she fled. "She's incorrigible," Emperor Wu said angrily. But after all, Jun Wuxia had apologized, so Feng Wu said calmly, "Your Majesty, please don't be mad. Her Royal Highness is still young. I'm sure she'll become more considerate when she's older." Those words wouldn't sound too odd if it hadn't been Feng Wu who said them, since she was younger than Jun Wuxia. Chapter 1533, Untitled. Thus, Emperor Wu took a deep breath when he looked at Feng Wu, but didn't comment on what she had just said. In the end, he waved at her and said, "You should go and examine Her Majesty now." Feng Wu nodded. By then, Granny Lan had already taken the Empress Dowager back to bed. Compared with her pale complexion before, the Empress Dowager now looked amazing. Resting her hands on her abdomen, the Empress Dowager smiled a little and looked happy even in sleep. With her rosy cheeks, she looked a lot better than most people. Even if Emperor Wu wasn't a medicine refiner, he could still tell from the Empress Dowager's complexion that she was doing very well. Feng Wu checked the Empress Dowager's pulse and nodded at Emperor Wu. "Her Majesty is fine now. After the 2 breakthroughs, Her Majesty is as strong as a bull and better than most people." Ahem, Emperor Wu coughed into his fist in embarrassment and asked, "Is Her Majesty really doing so well?" Feng Wu nodded and said, "It's true. Her Majesty has overcome her bottleneck. She's now filled with spiritual essence and couldn't be any more nourished. So, please don't worry." She then turned to leave. But Emperor Wu stopped her. "Xiao Wu," he cleared his throat. Feng Wu frowned a little and had a bad feeling. She was right to feel that way. Before Emperor Wu could say anything, Jun Linyuan took her hand and led her toward the door. Emperor Wu's face darkened. Frowning, he said, "Xiao Wu, do you want to work for the Empire?" His tone was very calm, but the meaning behind the question was more than a lot of people would be able to handle. Jun Linyuan was still leading Feng Wu away without looking back. But Emperor Wu gave a silent order. Immediately, 4 secret guards dressed in black came out of nowhere and blocked Jun Linyuan's way. The Crown Prince's face turned livid. Seeing that Jun Linyuan was ready to fight, Feng Wu involuntarily grabbed his hand. She then shook her head at him. Jun Linyuan would never let anyone stop him, but Feng Wu was probably the only exception. His right fist unclenched when Feng Wu held his hand, and the tension in it immediately disappeared. Emperor Wu's authoritative voice came from behind them. "Feng Wu, are you going to work for the Empire or not?" If his attitude could be considered mild the first time, when he asked again, a slight anger could already be detected in his tone. There was also something threatening contained in that question. Feng Wu still held Emperor Wu in awe and veneration. It wasn't just because he was a cautious emperor. More importantly, his capability was unfathomable. Jun Linyuan could afford to act willful with his father, but she wasn't strong enough to do that yet. Turning around, Feng Wu looked calmly at Emperor Wu. "Your Majesty, what do you mean?" Emperor Wu smiled. "I see that you're a great cook. How would you like to sell that recipe to the royal family?" So, they indeed wanted her recipe now. Feng Wu smiled a little and said, "Your Majesty, are you trying to purchase the recipe for the roast fish from me?" Emperor Wu narrowed his eyes. "From what I can see, even if we have your recipe, no one else will be able to make the fish like you do. Am I right?" Feng Wu only smiled. Emperor Wu grimaced inwardly. Jun Linyuan had picked a girl as difficult as himself. Chapter 1534, Untitled. One unruly Jun Linyuan was enough for him. He couldn't take yet another person challenging his authority as the emperor. Emperor Wu said directly, "Starting from tomorrow, you'll be in charge of Her Majesty's and my meals." Feng Wu narrowed her eyes. "Your Majesty," Emperor Wu waved his hand. "I've made up my mind. Are you going to defy me now?" Emperor Wu's tone was so authoritative when he asked the question that the entire tent was filled with an oppressive energy. Feng Wu might have made rapid progress in her cultivation, but she still hadn't cultivated long enough to withstand Emperor Wu's power. When the emperor lost his temper, a lot of people could die. At Emperor Wu's rage, the ground within a 5 kilometers radius began to shake, along with the trees and flowers that grew on it. The anger was obviously directed at Feng Wu. Standing in front of Emperor Wu, Feng Wu was under an incredible amount of pressure. The energy coming off him felt like a mountain on her shoulders. Feng Wu immediately froze, and her head went blank. The excruciating pain made her tremble uncontrollably. She thought she was going to die. The next second, someone stood in front of her and shielded her from all the pressure. Jun Linyuan. Although there was no wind, his robe still flapped in a non-existent breeze. Frost seemed to cover his dark, straight eyebrows, making him look unapproachable and terrifying. The power directed at Feng Wu fell upon Jun Linyuan instead. Emperor Wu frowned, and his eyes seemed to explode with flames. "Jun Linyuan," he bellowed. Not only did the crown prince ignore his father, he even bounced the pressure back at Emperor Wu. If Emperor Wu had been weaker than Jun Linyuan, he would have been devoured by his own power. His eyes widened as he stared at Jun Linyuan in disbelief. "You defiant son! How dare you!" Of course Emperor Wu wasn't weaker than Jun Linyuan, and he wouldn't get hurt from his own power, but he was angry that his son actually tried to hurt him. To the boy, his father and emperor wasn't even as important as a teenage girl. However, no matter how furious Emperor Wu was, Jun Linyuan kept his silence as usual and let the energy continuously charge at Emperor Wu. Fine. Emperor Wu was so angry that he almost lost his mind. With the stupid Jun Wuxia and the defiant Jun Linyuan, Emperor Wu was filled with rage. He struck out after those words. Whoosh! After a loud noise, Emperor Wu charged at Jun Linyuan. "I'm going to teach you a lesson today." Emperor Wu was relentless. The moment he rushed toward Jun Linyuan, the teenager pushed Feng Wu to the side and said solemnly, "Stay safe." Feng Wu nodded. "You too." Jun Linyuan's eyes flickered, and he didn't look so indifferent anymore. Was she worried about him? The possibility filled him with joy. Emperor Wu's fist arrived at that moment. Seeing the smile on Jun Linyuan's face, Emperor Wu almost lost his mind. What an unruly son! How could he smile at a moment like this? Chapter 1535. The Strike, 1. Emperor Wu didn't expect to see Jun Linyuan smile, and he almost fainted with rage. "You defiant boy," he bellowed, then pushed off of the ground with his toes and lashed out with his sword. Feng Wu had already moved to the side, and all of Emperor Wu's rage was directed at Jun Linyuan. But she could still sense the energy coming off Emperor Wu's sword, which froze the air and shattered it into tiny pieces that looked like ice shards. How terrifying that strength was! The cold wind froze Feng Wu to the bone. She followed Emperor Wu's sword and let her gaze land on Jun Linyuan. She had always known that Jun Linyuan was extremely talented and very advanced in his cultivation, but he still needed time to reach his full potential. Would he be able to withstand Emperor Wu's strike? Feng Wu narrowed her eyes, and didn't realize that she was concerned about Jun Linyuan. Despite the murderous energy coming at him, Jun Linyuan stood his ground without so much as moving a muscle. Emperor Wu was holding the Emperor's sword. It was a sword blessed by God and nature. With his rage, the energy coming off it was lethal enough to kill. Would Jun Linyuan be able to fend it off? Feng Wu had thought that she was a calm person and that she couldn't care less about Jun Linyuan's safety. However, when the sword struck at Jun Linyuan, Feng Wu's heart was beating so fast that it threatened to jump out of her mouth. She even forgot to breathe. Jun Linyuan, watch out. Pressing a hand to her chest, Feng Wu cried out. All of Jun Linyuan's attention was focused on the battle. He didn't turn his head, nor did he make a sound, but he nodded. He wouldn't have reacted to anyone else at a moment like this, but it was Feng Wu, and to him, she was more important than anything. Seeing Jun Linyuan's reaction, Emperor Wu was astonished. Because only masters like Jun Linyuan and him truly understood how dangerous it was to be distracted in a battle like this. But Jun Linyuan, that brat. How could he answer her at a time like this? It was like he had a death wish. Emperor Wu threw a dirty look at Feng Wu. It was malicious and relentless. There was even something murderous about it. But at that moment, Jun Linyuan started moving. He drew out Sky Destroyer from behind his back. Clang! The two swords met in midair. Instantly, the impact made a loud metallic sound, sending sparks everywhere. A shockwave spread out from the two swords. Rumbled a bang. Spiritual essence exploded. The tent was made from top-quality material that contained explosion-proof features of the highest grade. But at the impact, the Empress Dowager's tent fell to pieces in front of their eyes. The cloth fell to the ground like falling leaves. And all the furniture broke into tiny pieces. Even the ground was covered with web-like cracks. Was the impact only confined to this tent? Of course not. The tent was at the center of the collision, but the impact spread out in all directions. Hence, all hell broke loose in the campsite. Chapter 1536, The Strike, 2. What's going on? What's going on? Are we being attacked? Are we? It's Her Majesty's tent. Oh my God. All the influential families that had accompanied Emperor Wu here panicked and looked very anxious. But what they saw when they rushed over was countless imperial guards had surrounded the Empress Dowager's tent. With their solemn expressions and the murderous look in their eyes, the atmosphere felt very tense. Master Dugu and Master Zhuo arrived first, followed by Lord Mu and the others. If the atmosphere had already frightened them, when they saw the damaged tent, they almost fainted. That was because their emperor was holding his emperor's sword. Opposite him, the crown prince was holding his Sky Destroyer. They stood there, facing each other. The two of them were at loggerheads, and a battle could break out at any moment. No, it wasn't going to break out. It was already happening. That frightening strike was part of their confrontation. OMG. Holy crap. This is crazy. I can't believe it. His Majesty and His Royal Highness are fighting. How? What was the reason behind this fight between the Emperor and the Crown Prince? It could be as small as a quarrel between the father and son, but it could also be as severe as a coup to depose the Emperor. Immediately, everyone gave Jun Linyuan complicated looks. And they all forgot to speak. To them, Jun Linyuan was indeed unfathomably capable, and no one was as suitable a candidate for future emperor as he was, but he was only an emperor to be. How could he draw his sword against his father? Had he lost his mind? Was the Junwu Empire going to fall into chaos? Many senior officials who had remained neutral were filled with sorrow and started worrying about the empire. Those who supported Jun Linyuan, such as the head of the pavilion of the Imperial Library, were worried sick. Sweat trickled down the man's forehead. People like Master Dugu and Master Zhuo, who opposed Jun Linyuan, were thrilled and could hardly contain their excitement. Both Emperor Wu and Jun Linyuan were furious. Energy filled their swords. The air seemed to freeze again. Everyone was affected by the tension in the air. A furious emperor and an equally angry crown prince. It was as if one wrong move and the world would collapse. Everyone's hearts were about to jump out of their throats. Where's Her Majesty, the Empress Dowager? Yuan Qian, the head of the pavilion of the Imperial Library, walked back and forth with trembling fists. That's right. Where's Her Majesty? Right now, only Her Majesty can stop this fight. But Her Majesty is still unconscious. The chief steward was so anxious that he thought he was going to have a heart attack. As a steadfast supporter of Jun Linyuan, the chief steward was obviously on the crown prince's side. He of all people would like to see the Empress Dowager show up now to save the day. But the Empress Dowager had been so weak even before she made 2 breakthroughs because of Feng Wu's fish. She had been stretched so thin by everything, so no matter how loud it was outside, she was still fast asleep. The chief steward was extremely concerned as he looked at the Empress Dowager, who was sound asleep. Your Majesty, please wake up. Otherwise, the world may have changed the next time you open your eyes. Chapter 1537, The Strike, 3. The chief steward wasn't the only one who thought that way. Everyone stood on tiptoe and craned their necks, hoping that the Empress Dowager would show up out of the blue, save the day, and end this terrifying confrontation, but what the chief steward told them only made them despair. Her Majesty is still unconscious. What do we do now? What are we going to do? Who else can stop this fight? This is a disaster. Oh God, the Empire. What's going to happen now? Meanwhile, Emperor Wu was glaring at Jun Linyuan with eyes that could spit fire. Of course he knew that everyone was watching. Because of that, he felt utterly ashamed. It was already humiliating to fight his son in public, but the brat wouldn't back off and acted so stubborn. Emperor Wu was furious. Even if he wanted to stop, he still needed an excuse. But not with the Empress Dowager unconscious and Empress Dugu hiding away, none of the officials dared to move any closer. No one was there to provide Emperor Wu with a proper excuse. He glowered at Jun Linyuan and pointed his sword at him. You brat! Are you going to keep doing this? It was a very obvious hint. All the brat needed to do was admit his fault and back off. That way this could end. But Jun Linyuan was as dauntless as ever. Of course, he said without hesitation. Emperor Wu almost had a heart attack. What a defiant son. With everyone watching, he would lose all his authority as an emperor if he couldn't keep his son under control. Emperor Wu was forced to keep going. Fine. If you really have a death wish, I'll give that to you. Emperor Wu pointed at Jun Linyuan with his emperor sword, and spiritual essence instantly gathered around him. Immediately, all the spiritual essence around him rushed toward him until it was absorbed by the sword. The same thing happened to Jun Linyuan as well. Murderous intent filled the air. The battle felt like a sword hanging over everyone's head which could fall at any moment. Your Majesty, please don't. Yuan Qian, the head of the pavilion of the Imperial Library, knelt down first and pounded his forehead on the ground as he cried, trying to persuade the emperor and the crown prince. Yuan Qian was an influential court official. He was already advanced in his years and a respected figure. Apart from Grand Secretary Fong, he was almost the most highly ranked civil official. Therefore, his pleading was very significant. Behind him, all the other officials and their family members knelt down as well. Your Majesty, please forgive His Royal Highness. Your Majesty, His Royal Highness is still young. Your Majesty, you're much more magnanimous than this. Your Majesty. Everyone begged Emperor Wu to stop. Only then did Emperor Wu feel better, but before he could end the confrontation, something Master Dugu said made him flare up again. Master Dugu said, Your Royal Highness, you're His Majesty's subject. How can you point your sword at the Emperor? Are you trying to take the throne by force? Immediately, a hush fell over the crowd. It was so quiet that they could hear the sound of falling leaves. Everyone had been trying to look past that and didn't dare bring it up, but Master Dugu had other plans. What a schemer! Emperor Wu felt a throbbing pain in his chest. This brat. Did he really want to usurp the throne? Chapter 1538, Center of Attention 1. To an emperor, nothing was as important as the absolute power of his throne. You brat! Is that what you're planning? Emperor Wu was furious. There was endless rage and sorrow in his eyes. Yuan Qian and the others looked at Jun Linyuan in terror. My dear Crown Prince, in a moment like this, please just back off. Say something nice, or there really is going to be a disaster. But Jun Linyuan was never the type to play nice. He snorted and said impatiently, "Do you want to fight or not?" That sentence almost gave Emperor Wu a heart attack. What a defiant son. The others were filled with despair when they heard what Jun Linyuan said and were convinced that this empire was doomed. Fine. Emperor Wu was genuinely angry now. If he had considered making an excuse to stop this fight before, after Jun Linyuan challenged his authority over and over again, he was filled with rage. Die! Endless energy rushed out of the Emperor's sword like a never-ending thunderclap. Dark clouds gathered in the sky overhead. Those kneeling on the ground felt that even their souls were trembling. Shit! They all had an ominous feeling. The Emperor activated his killing stance. And Jun Linyuan activated his as well. The two men were fighting with their lives. Yuan Qian was worried sick. It was a duel now. Even if no one died in the end, they would still be severely injured. More importantly, this would damage their relationship. Feng Wu was equally shocked. It wouldn't be too bad if Emperor Wu ended up injuring Jun Linyuan, but if it was the other way round and in front of all these people, she couldn't imagine what would happen then. Moreover, she was the cause of everything. Stop! When the two men were ready to strike, Feng Wu ran onto the battlefield and stood between them. Emperor Wu's strike was already headed for her. Everyone's eyes widened as they stared at Feng Wu in disbelief. To them, Feng Wu seemed to have just lost her mind. Oh God, this is crazy. Does she have a death wish? She's doomed. His Majesty's strike will crush her. How stupid is she? That's such a meaningless way to die. No, you don't understand. Feng Wu is doing that because she thinks she can stop this fight. Ah, Feng Wu? Stop this fight? How can she do that when a lot of influential officials weren't able to? How naive. That's right. And now, she's about to pay for her naivete. A short distance away, in a dark corner a pair of glinting, malicious eyes stared at Feng Wu. Feng Wu, there I was, thinking how awesome you are, but is that all you can do? How am I going to take my revenge when you're dead? That's okay. You may be dead, but there's still your family. Feng Xiaoqi? Duan Chaoga? So, just die. And you'll soon be joined by those you wanted to protect. In the dark corner, Jun Wuxia smirked. Chapter 1539. Center of Attention, 2. Everyone in the crowd was convinced that Feng Wu was going to die. They looked at her the way one would look at a dead person, but it had never occurred to them that she could be so blessed. Frost seemed to cover Jun Linyuan's handsome face. He had never looked so panicked before. Was the Crown Prince even capable of that feeling? Before the others had time to react, he had already dashed forward like a streak of lightning. He moved so fast that he left afterimages in the air. Rumble! Clang! The moment Jun Linyuan caught Feng Wu by her thin waist to remove her from the spot, the Emperor's sword pierced her heart. And the blade went through her before it pierced Jun Linyuan's chest. Just like that, the sword went through both Feng Wu and Jun Linyuan, pinning them together. OMG! The crowd almost fainted. They covered their mouths with both hands and almost cried out in astonishment. Holy shit! Why, Your Majesty! His Royal Highness. Teach that was. No one expected that Jun Linyuan would rush over to save Feng Wu at that critical moment. And even fewer people expected to see him injured. Because everyone was under the impression that Jun Linyuan would never lose. He was supposed to be invincible and omnipotent, so how could anyone injure him? But had Jun Linyuan and Feng Wu really been injured? Wait. His Royal Highness seems to be disappearing. Someone cried out. Hearing that, the other people all realized something incredible. It was true. The crown prince who had been pierced by the emperor's sword seemed to be disappearing in midair. Not only him, but even Feng Wu faded away as well. The smile froze on Jun Wuxia's face. What's going on? Is Feng Wu not dead? She was flustered and had a bad feeling. Just then someone cried out. His Royal Highness is there. They followed the person's finger and felt greatly relieved. Up in the air, their crown prince was holding Feng Wu by the waist. The lower hems of their clothes flapped and tangled together in the wind as they slowly landed. Only then did the others realize that the sword had only pierced Jun Linyuan's afterimage. He had simply moved too fast. And his actual form had only just landed. As the crown prince landed with Feng Wu, the emperor's sword flew through the air to hit a cliff in the distance. Rumble! The impact shook heaven and earth. As everyone watched, the cliff that towered into the clouds crumbled and collapsed like a pile of sand. It used to be a mountain. But it only took the sword a split second to destroy it completely. What kind of power was that? Imagine what would happen if it had struck a person. It would be so horrible. Feng Wu had yet to recover from the shock. Emperor Wu had regretted it as soon as he made that strike. He gradually came back to his senses and calmed down. Seeing the way Jun Linyuan wrapped his arms around Feng Wu in a protective way, Emperor Wu didn't know what to say. Chapter 1540, Center of Attention, 3. With Emperor Wu remaining silent and the Empress Dowager absent, no one else dared to speak. Hence, an awkward silence filled the air. Looking around, Feng Wu saw the malicious look in Master Duga's eyes, and her stomach lurched. She couldn't let Master Duga drive a wedge between the father and son again. Emperor Wu was all about saving face, and Jun Linyuan was dauntless. Being alienated from his father wouldn't do Jun Linyuan any good. Taking Jun Linyuan's hand, Feng Wu said tentatively, "Didn't you say that we could eat after you and His Majesty compare notes? Now that it's done, can we go now?" Compare notes? Everyone stared at Emperor Wu and Jun Linyuan in amazement. So, what happened between them was only a friendly exchange of blows, and not a life-and-death duel. Even Emperor Wu was surprised. He was amazed by Feng Wu, because she had resolved the conflict as effortlessly as that, and had even offered him the perfect excuse. Master Dugu stared at Feng Wu with piercing eyes. That damn girl. He should never have given her the chance to speak. By defining the fight as a friendly competition, she had easily resolved the situation. Since it wasn't a confrontation between the father and son, an attempt to usurp the throne was no longer a possibility. But what Master Duga didn't know was that Feng Wu was only getting started. Holding Jun Linyuan's hand, Feng Wu said gingerly, "You're still so young and have only cultivated for a few years, so it's only natural that you lose to His Majesty. You can always work harder in the future." Master Dugu was already staring at Feng Wu. When he heard those words, he opened his eyes so wide that his eyeballs almost fell out. Not only did she resolve the situation, she managed to offer Emperor Wu such a great excuse. Moreover, she laid a foundation for a potential exchange between the father and son in the future. Feng Wu was amazing. Just when everyone else thought that she was going to say something even more unexpected, that Feng Wu looked up at Jun Linyuan with her clear doe eyes. She then moved closer and whispered in his ear, "Jun Linyuan, I'm hungry." She put his hand on her flat stomach. Gurgled at her stomach growled right at that moment. In the distance, no one could tell what Feng Wu said to Jun Linyuan. All they saw was her putting his hand on her belly. Everyone's faces darkened. It was especially the case with those who despised Feng Wu, and their eyes glinted coldly. They couldn't believe it. How could Feng Wu still try to seduce the crown prince in a moment like this? The crown prince and his father were still at loggerheads, so of course he wouldn't listen to her. But to their surprise, Jun Linyuan only glanced at Feng Wu before he took her hand and calmly walked away. All the others saw was his straight back. Well, that was... The rest of the crowd felt like fainting. They couldn't believe their eyes. Feng Wu just walked away with His Royal Highness like that? No, that's not possible. I don't buy it. Feng Wu can't have such influence. The confrontation had been between the emperor and the crown prince, the two most influential figures in the empire. How could a girl like Feng Wu change anything? Chapter 1541, Center of Attention 4. Mrs. Zhua had the biggest frown on her face. She believed that her Zhua Qingwan was the future wife of the crown prince. Who the hell did that Feng Wu think she was? Hearing everyone else's exclamations, Mrs. Zhua felt even worse. Seeing her reaction, Mrs. Dugu couldn't help but say, I think His Royal Highness himself wanted to leave in the first place, and what Feng Wu said only gave him a good excuse. That's why it seemed like she was leading His Royal Highness away. Everyone exclaimed with surprise when they heard that explanation. You have a point. That was indeed what happened. You're right. That should be the case. No one wanted to admit Feng Wu's actual influence, so they accepted Mrs. Dugu's explanation right away. However, some people were smarter than they were. Emperor Wu's eyes glinted coldly as he watched Jun Linyuan and Feng Wu leave. Everyone thought that he was staring at Jun Linyuan, but Emperor Wu was actually staring at Feng Wu. Feng Wu, Emperor Wu narrowed his eyes. Before, Empress Dugu told him that a master oracle had predicted that Feng Wu was capable of turning the world upside down, but the emperor hadn't believed it at the time. Now, however, it seemed that the master could be right. Turn the world upside down? Emperor Wu wondered if that referred to his empire, and he looked alarmed. Little did Feng Wu know that by temporarily resolving the issue between Emperor Wu and Jun Linyuan and giving Emperor Wu an excuse, she had successfully put the emperor on guard. Maybe she would have thought twice if she knew this was going to happen. Jun Linyuan quickly led Feng Wu away. With his long legs and large strides, Feng Wu had to trot to catch up with him. Just then, ding. She heard a pleasant sound in her head. The 6th trial has been completed. That voice made Feng Wu so relieved that she wanted to jump around. Yeah. She had finally finished this task. Her 18 days working as Jun Linyuan's maid were finally over. Oh God! Feng Wu was so excited that she wanted to run around and laugh out loud. Haha. She finally wasn't a maid anymore. Talk about freedom. She finally wasn't under Jun Linyuan's control. Stop fidgeting. Jun Linyuan had no idea why the girl was so excited. Even her hand was trembling in his. But Feng Wu was as happy as a bird out of its cage. Let go of me, she prompted Jun Linyuan. The crown prince frowned a little, and his jaw tightened. It was obvious that he was unhappy. Seeing that Jun Linyuan wouldn't move, Feng Wu was a little flustered, and she said impatiently, Let go of me, Jun Linyuan. No. But he only held her hand tighter. Moreover, Feng Wu could sense his temper rising. Jun Linyuan was sulking. Feng Wu looked at him in bewilderment. Why was he angry again? Could it be? Feng Wu asked tentatively, Hey, Jun Linyuan, are you angry because I said that you lost? The crown prince's face darkened, and he didn't want to talk to Feng Wu. The more she thought about it, the more confident she was in her guess, so Feng Wu said grumpily, Hey, Jun Linyuan, can't you see that I said those things to help you? Chapter 1542, Ridiculous 7th Trial, 1. With what was happening, everyone would think that you and His Majesty were having a life-or-death duel. You didn't see the terrified looks on their faces. They looked like they were watching the sky fall. That was why I said that you were only comparing notes instead of having a full-on duel. Plus, I said you lost, big deal. Not only is he the emperor, he's your dad as well. Why can't you just give him an out? Jun Linyuan kept walking with his dark face and wouldn't talk to Feng Wu. Feng Wu grumbled, If you hadn't saved me earlier, I would never have bothered to act as the go-between. What a waste of my kindness. Jun Linyuan seemed a little appeased, but his jaw was still locked tight, and he remained silent. He decided that he would forgive the girl who wouldn't let him hold her hand if she just said one more nice thing, but at that critical moment, Feng Wu heard another notification in her head, which made her jump. The system spoke again. Feng Wu's stomach lurched. Host, please be aware, you're about to receive the 7th trial. You're about to receive the 7th trial. Feng Wu's heart sped up. What did the system want? From what Feng Wu could recall, the system had never done this before when it released a new trial. 3 seconds later, the actual task was announced. For the 7th trial, the host has to provoke Jun Linyuan until his rage is at maximum level. Provoke Jun Linyuan until his rage is at maximum level. You have until the end of the winter hunt. The voice vanished after those words. It had probably realized how ridiculous the task was. What? Feng Wu was dumbfounded when she heard the announcement and even forgot to move. The fairy flinched and didn't dare to come out to face Feng Wu in a moment like this. However, Feng Wu had already sensed her and was glaring at her in her head. Come over here. She beckoned the fairy over. The fairy cringed and slowly moved closer. Feng Wu was angry, but more than anything, she felt helpless. Resting her hands on her waist, she rolled her eyes before turning her gaze on the fairy. What's that supposed to mean? The fairy gingerly looked at Feng Wu and said, just like you heard. Feng Wu smirked. And what's that supposed to mean? Ahem, the fairy rubbed her nose. She realized that Feng Wu was serious, which was quite frightening. You just have to make His Royal Highness angry. The fairy also realized how ridiculous that request was, which was why she was embarrassed. Make him angry? Feng Wu lost her temper. Why would I do that? The fairy shook her head, for she didn't know the answer either. Resting her hands on her waist, Feng Wu was furious. Do you have any idea how frightening Jun Linyuan is? And you're asking me to provoke him? And it has to be full-blown? She asked in resignation, and please tell me, how am I going to know what that is? How do you measure his rage? You can. You can. The fairy nodded. Chapter 1543, Ridiculous 7th Trial, 2. Patting her chest, she looked at Feng Wu with her clear, pretty eyes. I can measure it. Feng Wu looked at her in surprise. The fairy nodded again. Yes, I can. I really can. Feng Wu was dubious. Is that even measurable? The fairy said, yes. Feng Wu said, so, tell me, how would you define full-blown rage? Ahem, the fairy glanced at Feng Wu. It's when he's so mad that he's about to lose his mind. Such as? Feng Wu said. Such as, he may want to strangle you, the fairy said awkwardly. Feng Wu's mouth fell open. You're joking, right? The fairy smiled bitterly. I wish I were, but that's the truth. It's what he'll want to do if he's extremely angry. Feng Wu rolled her eyes. So, you're saying that I'll have to risk my life to do that? The fairy said, well? Feng Wu asked, what am I going to do then? The fairy blinked and looked innocently at Feng Wu. Feng Wu didn't say a word. Fine. You can go, she didn't know what else to say. Hearing that, the fairy immediately vanished from the spot, running so fast that it didn't suit her adorable style. Feng Wu didn't say a word. By then Jun Linyuan had already become angry. He was holding Feng Wu's hand. Although the girl stumbled after him, she wouldn't even make a sound. Was she that reluctant to hold hands with him? The more he thought about it, the angrier Jun Linyuan became. Feng Wu returned to herself, and when she looked up at Jun Linyuan, there was something complicated in her eyes. All of a sudden, she felt rather sympathetic toward him. The system had indeed given her a hard time, giving her all sorts of impossible tasks, but at the same time as the target of her task, Jun Linyuan had gone through quite a lot as well, and he didn't know what actually happened. At that thought, Feng Wu gave Jun Linyuan a sympathetic glance. Right now, she actually felt that they were in the same boat. His Royal Highness is 15% angry. As soon as Feng Wu turned her senses inward, she heard the fairy's melodious voice. What? Feng Wu's heart sped up. Seriously? Could the fairy evaluate how angry Jun Linyuan was so accurately? Moreover, she was only getting started, but Jun Linyuan was already 15% there? Feng Wu's eyes lit up, and she didn't find the prospect so hopeless anymore. She held Jun Linyuan's hand and sounded pleasantly surprised. Jun Linyuan, are you mad? She couldn't hold back her excitement when she said that. The Crown Prince was even angrier when he heard that. What was that supposed to mean? Why was she so happy to see him angry? His Royal Highness is 30% angry. Wow. Feng Wu almost jumped up and down on the spot. That was amazing. Jun Linyuan was so easy to provoke, and the task didn't seem difficult at all. At that thought, Feng Wu smiled at Jun Linyuan. For some unknown reason, the Crown Prince's anger dissipated as soon as he saw the way the girl smiled at him. Chapter 1544. That's awkward. 1. You're such an impossible girl. Jun Linyuan looked up and rubbed Feng Wu's head grumpily. His Royal Highness is 10% angry, His Royal Highness is 5% angry. His Royal Highness is 3% angry. The smile froze on Feng Wu's face. How was that possible? Feng Wu stared at Jun Linyuan in disbelief. She was still waiting for Jun Linyuan to get angry, but in the end his rage disappeared, just like that. Silly girl. Seeing that Feng Wu looked as dispirited as someone who had just been struck by lightning, Jun Linyuan was no longer angry. He rubbed Feng Wu's head again. His Royal Highness is 0% angry. Feng Wu. That was incredible. Feng Wu realized that Jun Linyuan was so unpredictable that she had no idea what he would do next. He was so mad at first that he was 30% there. Why did his rage disappear so suddenly? What was she supposed to do? Feng Wu felt so conflicted that she didn't know how to proceed. What's wrong? The Crown Prince raised his straight eyebrows and looked at Feng Wu in amusement. He usually looked distant and unapproachable, but now, when he looked down, she could see a faint smile in his eyes. Feng Wu looked at Jun Linyuan and thought she was seeing things. She sounded surprised when she said, Jun Linyuan, are you smiling? Ahem. With how proud Jun Linyuan was, he immediately straightened his back and looked solemnly at Feng Wu. Either your mind is wandering off or you're pulling a long face. What's going on in your head? I was thinking about you. Feng Wu shrugged. Cough. Jun Linyuan almost choked on his own spit. That was way too straightforward. However, he secretly enjoyed it and was immediately in a good mood. Poking Feng Wu in her smooth forehead, he said, Who gave you the permission to think about me, the Crown Prince? Feng Wu was dumbfounded. She was only trying to figure out why Jun Linyuan was no longer angry, and it wasn't what he was thinking. He had misunderstood her. But before Feng Wu could explain, Jun Linyuan crossed his hands behind his back, raised his chin, and spoke in a proud tone. Well, since you've been good today, you have my permission to think of me a little. Feng Wu stared at Jun Linyuan in disbelief. You have my permission. Feng Wu was so mad that she couldn't utter a word. How could anyone be so narcissistic? Jun Linyuan realized that Feng Wu wasn't following him after a few steps, so he stopped, turned around, and glanced at her. Keep up. If she was still trying to finish the 6th trial, she would have to follow him. But now... Feng Wu pouted. No, I won't. You won't? The Crown Prince narrowed his eyes. Crossing her arms, Feng Wu said proudly, I'm not going with you. Jun Linyuan stared at her with eyes as profound as the universe. Feng Wu snorted. Our 18-day bet is over. Why should I still follow you around? I won't do it. Feng Wu waved at Jun Linyuan as she walked away. I'm off. Your Royal Highness, have a great winter hunt. She didn't hear a reply. But she felt very pleased. She had been oppressed by Jun Linyuan all this time. Now that she was finally able to say no, she couldn't be any more satisfied. Chapter 1545. That's awkward, too. However, she only took a few steps. Something then struck her, and her stomach lurched. This wasn't right. She had been so keen on getting back at Jun Linyuan that she had forgotten something very important. She had already received the 7th trial, which still concerned Jun Linyuan, and the deadline was set for the end of the winter hunt. That was to say, she would have to stay with this lot until the hunt was over. Just then, 2 men in back walked out of a dark corner and blocked Feng Wu's way. She didn't see them until they were in front of her, and they were as silent as ghosts. They were covered in black from head to toe so that all Feng Wu could see were their sharp, cold eyes. They blocked Feng Wu's way on both sides. She could see that both men were unbelievably capable. Were they Jun Linyuan's man? If that was the case, Feng Wu was elated. That way she could stay. It was the perfect excuse that she wouldn't have been able to come up with otherwise. But Feng Wu was also a very proud person. She turned around and glanced at Jun Linyuan. "Your Royal Highness, please don't tell me you can't bring yourself to watch me leave." From what she knew about Jun Linyuan, he wouldn't be goaded, and she was confident that he would make her stay. However, Jun Linyuan surprised her. The Crown Prince stared at the 2 men and shook his head. The 2 men disappeared instantly, as if they had never shown up. Feng Wu didn't say a word. That was really awkward. She then turned to look at Jun Linyuan. But he only put his hands behind his back and slowly walked away without so much as a glance at her. Feng Wu didn't say a word. Listening to the howling wind in the middle of the silent wilderness, Feng Wu felt chilled to the bone. She was abandoned here, just like that. Had Jun Linyuan given up on her? Feng Wu felt very conflicted and smacked her head in frustration. Had it not been for the 7th trial, she would have left already. Staying here was never part of her plan, but then, the 7th trial came along. Wouldn't it be so embarrassing if she turned around now? She also had her dignity to consider. Feng Wu was still hesitating over her options when she heard a very welcome voice. "Hey, little Feng Wu, what are you doing here all by yourself?" Feng Sun showed up out of the blue and studied her in bewilderment. Feng Wu's eyes lit up in pleasant surprise. Here came her excuse. "Well," Feng Wu gritted her teeth and said gingerly, "I want to go home." "Are you an idiot?" Feng Sun smacked her on the head, making her grimace. "Ouch!" Feng Wu flinched and stared at Feng Sun with her teary doe eyes. "We're arriving at the Sinal grassland tomorrow, and you want to go home now? You have no idea what you're talking about. Go to bed now. We have a tough battle tomorrow." Feng Sun then tried to drag Feng Wu away. A tough battle? That immediately caught Feng Wu's attention. Feng Sun was confused by her question. "Didn't Boss Jun tell you?" Feng Wu asked. "What was Jun Linyuan supposed to tell me?" "Well, ahem." Feng Sun immediately covered his mouth and pretended that he hadn't said a thing. "It's nothing. Just get a good rest tonight." Chapter 1546, That's Awkward, 3. "Hey, you." Feng Sun ran off before Feng Wu could ask any questions. Feng Wu didn't know what to say once again. She was left alone in the cold wind, but she had a question now. From what Feng Sun said, what was the thing that Jun Linyuan was supposed to tell her but hadn't? She headed back with the question in her head, and before she knew it, she had gone back to Jun Linyuan's tent. In the royal procession, only 3 people's tents had courtyards, and needless to say, one of them was Jun Linyuan. Feng Wu ran into him as soon as she walked into the yard. Their eyes met. Jun Linyuan's eyes were so deep and bright that they reminded her of the sky lit up at night. She felt mesmerized. Her heart sped up, and she looked away involuntarily, avoiding Jun Linyuan's eyes. However, Jun Linyuan kept staring at her with his dark, brooding eyes. His gaze was intense and meaningful. Ahem. Crossing her hands behind her back, Feng Wu straightened her back and stared at Jun Linyuan proudly. "Feng Sun dragged me back." Her meaning was that she hadn't wanted to come back herself. The Crown Prince looked at her and asked, "Where is he?" Well, looking around, Feng Wu couldn't see Feng Sun anywhere, and she wanted to kick the guy in the butt. The Crown Prince smiled slightly. "You dishonest girl." Feng Wu glared at him. "Feng Sun really did drag me back. I didn't want to come back here. He glanced at Feng Wu and went back inside without saying another word. Feng Wu smacked her head. How embarrassing. Master, please don't forget the 7th trial, the fairy reminded her in her head. Feng Wu nodded. I know. She had indeed come back, but she despaired at the thought of the trial. She had to provoke Jun Linyuan until he was 100% angry. What would she have to do to make him that mad? In the light of a candle, Feng Wu sat at the table with her chin in her hands and was lost in thought. Knocked at there was a knock at the door. Come in. Feng Wu turned her head in the direction of the door. It was Granny Gong. She smiled at Feng Wu when she saw her. Feng Wu had already left a good impression on her. After Feng Wu saved the Empress Dowager, Granny Gong was even more fond of her, and in her mind, Feng Wu was already the future wife of the Crown Prince. Miss Wu, please come with me. Granny Gong took Feng Wu's hand and led her toward the door. Feng Wu was confused. Granny Gong, what's going on? Granny Gong smiled. His Royal Highness is a little hungry, so please come to the kitchen with me. You don't need to make anything complicated in the middle of the night. Some noodles will do. Are you saying I have to cook now? Feng Wu asked quietly. Granny Gong nodded. That's right. His Royal Highness loves your cooking and has gotten used to it during this trip. You're our only hope now. Feng Wu's eyes lit up. She had been playing the obedient and docile maid all along, taking care of Jun Linyuan's food and his daily life. If she turned him down now, what would Jun Linyuan do? He was bound to get angry. Of course Feng Wu wouldn't miss such a great chance. Glancing at the candlelit tent a short distance away, she raised her voice deliberately and said, Granny Gong, I'm so sorry, but I'm afraid I can't do that. Chapter 1547. That's awkward. 4. What Granny Gong had considered a done deal took an unexpected turn. Miss Wu, why is that? Granny Gong frowned. His Royal Highness is 10% angry. Feng Wu heard the voice in her head before she said anything, and she was thrilled. But Jun Linyuan had heard her, and as expected, he was angry. Because, tilting her head, Feng Wu tried to come up with a reason. His Royal Highness is mad at me at the moment, and if he knows that I'm the cook, he'll only get more upset, won't he? That's why I can't do it. She tried to sense the change in Jun Linyuan's mood as she spoke. However, he didn't react to her excuse at all, which made her even more conflicted. I don't buy it. Staring at Feng Wu, Granny Gong said, Miss Wu, I'm going to need something more convincing than that. Meanwhile, Feng Wu was trying to figure out what could trigger Jun Linyuan's anger, so she immediately came up with another excuse. Well, what if I say that I just don't want to cook? Why? Granny Gong frowned. Is it because it's so exhausting? Feng Wu said, well, not really. I just don't want to cook for His Royal Highness anymore. Jun Linyuan is 20% angry. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. She seemed to have faintly detected something, but she couldn't exactly pick out what. Granny Gong frowned even harder. Miss Wu, you're joking, right? She shot a warning glance at Feng Wu as she spoke. The walls were very thin here, and the Crown Prince was in the room right next door. Therefore, he could hear everything Feng Wu said. But what she didn't know was that Feng Wu wanted Jun Linyuan to hear her. Ahem, Granny Gong, I'm serious. Feng Wu smiled bitterly. I really don't want to cook for His Royal Highness anymore. Why? Granny Gong wouldn't let it drop. Because, Feng Wu racked her brain, trying to find an excuse. Because it's too much work. Granny Gong, you of all people should know what I mean. To make a meal delicious, I need to activate a formation every single time, which consumes a lot of energy. I fear I'll be drained of spiritual essence if I keep doing it. Feng Wu smiled bitterly as she tried to sense Jun Linyuan's reaction. With her blatant refusal, she was confident that Jun Linyuan would be even angrier now. But to her surprise, Jun Linyuan is 5% angry. Jun Linyuan is 1% angry. Jun Linyuan is no longer angry. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. What the heck? While June Linyuan was no longer angry, Feng Wu almost jumped to her feet in frustration. She had refused to cook for June Linyuan, but why did he stop feeling angry so quickly? How unpredictable could June Linyuan be? There was no way to tell what could set him off. What should she do? Miss Wu? Miss Wu? Seeing that Feng Wu was lost in thought, Granny Gong called out to her. Just then Feng opened the door and walked out of the tent. He smiled very kindly at Feng Wu. If Miss Wu doesn't want to do it, she won't have to. From now on, you can choose what to do freely and no one can force you. Feng smiled when he told Feng Wu that was what His Royal Highness said word for word. Chapter 1548, Green Spring Vine 1. Feng Wu was utterly surprised. What? This time, it was Feng Wu's turn to feel embarrassed. She didn't expect to be able to earn her freedom with a random excuse she had just made up. Mr. Feng actually... Before Feng Wu could explain, Feng waved at her with a smile on his face. Your health is the most important thing, Miss Wu. As long as you're happy, everything is fine. Feng Wu said, well, she was already feeling a little guilty. Actually, I like taking care of His Royal Highness, she said gingerly. That was the way she was. If someone mistreated her, she would make sure she got back at them tenfold. But she would also repay those who treated her well. Just then, Feng Wu heard the voice in her head. June Linyuan is 5% happy. What the heck? Feng Wu's eyes widened as she stared at the room next door in disbelief. She glared at the fairy in her head. I thought you were measuring his anger. Why does his happiness matter now? She asked in resignation. Moreover, he had cheered up for no reason, which made her uneasy, and she instinctively resisted the idea. Well, the fairy cringed. I want to know the truth. Stop fidgeting. Speak. Feng Wu glared at her. The fairy stammered. Oh, the task is so ridiculous that I thought I should do you a little favor and try to cheer you up a little. So, I'm also evaluating his happiness for you. Feng Wu found the idea idiotic, and she glared at the fairy. You're trying to cheer me up a little? Is that your idea of cheering me up? The fairy nodded repeatedly. Feng Wu rolled her eyes. What if I want to cancel it? The fairy hesitated. Feng Wu asked, can I cancel it or not? The fairy stammered, well, I can't do that now. Feng Wu was so frustrated that she glared at the fairy. Frightened, the fairy burst into tears. Young master, what do I do now? Sob. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. Fine. I'll just see it as a way to monitor June Linyuan's emotions. Feng Wu had no choice but to accept the reality. But what would it take to infuriate June Linyuan? Feng Wu felt rather helpless. Just then, Granny Gong came back with a tea set. Seeing that Feng Wu was still there, she was surprised. Miss Wu, why are you still here? I thought you would have gone to bed. Feng Wu cleared her throat. She couldn't tell her that she had forgotten about the time because she was trying to figure out how to make June Linyuan angry. Ah, I see. Granny Gong looked from Feng Wu to the shadow on the tent. Because of the candle lit up inside the tent, they could see June Linyuan's silhouette on the wall of the tent. Following Granny Gong's gaze, Feng Wu saw that silhouette as well. Seeing the meaningful look in Granny Gong's eyes, Feng Wu said, Ahem, Granny Gong, please don't get the wrong idea. I'm not looking at June Linyuan. Please believe me. Of course Granny Gong didn't believe a thing she said. She then stuffed the tea set into Feng Wu's hands. The tea is ready. It's the green spring vine, His Royal Highness's favorite. That extremely expensive green spring vine? Feng Wu exclaimed. Chapter 1549, Green Spring Vine 2. Granny Gong nodded. That's right. It's the green spring vine from Chuanbei Mountain. Only less than half a kilo is produced every year, and each leaf is worth more than you can count. Moreover, it's not something you can buy with money. She smiled. Green spring vine is indeed very rare, but it's produced every year. This tea set, on the other hand, is even rarer. The tea set? Fengwu looked at the tea set and saw that it was pale blue in color. After a second look, she realized that it contained a very profound formation. That's right. His Royal Highness obtained this tea set by accident. The most special thing about it is that it can produce water on its own. Is it spiritual water? Are you saying that it can produce spiritual water on its own? Fengwu raised an eyebrow. That's right. It's so strange. Whenever we put tea in, water will run down the sides of the cup. Moreover, the water is filled with spiritual essence. Of course, the tea has to be something as wonderful as green spring vine. Granny Gong then stuffed the tea set into Fengwu's hands. His Royal Highness is still working at this hour, and I'm sure he's parched. Miss Wu, please take it inside. Fengwu asked, What? Granny Gong, shouldn't you send it in? Granny Gong smiled and said, I need to prepare His Royal Highness's outfit for tomorrow, so I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you with the task. Miss Wu, please go. Granny Gong gave her a little shove before quickly walking away. Fengwu said, Granny Gong, wait. Granny Gong didn't even look back. She walked very fast, as if someone was chasing her. Fengwu didn't know what to say. Feng was standing right outside the tent, so Fengwu went up to him and wanted to give him the tea set. But Feng opened the door with a smile. Miss Wu, please enter. Fengwu didn't know what to say. Her plan was to hand the set to Feng. But Feng wouldn't take it no matter what. With no other choice, Fengwu had to bring the tea to Jun Linyuan on her own. It was just tea and she could leave as soon as she put it down. At that thought, Fengwu stepped into the tent. Feng closed the door quietly behind her as soon as she walked in. From Fengwu's point of view, she could only see Jun Linyuan's back. Right now, he was sitting in front of his desk, on which was a pile of memorials to the throne. Some of them were open, and Jun Linyuan held a red pen in his hand. With a flick of his pen, he could decide some of the most important state affairs. An idea suddenly struck Fengwu. Would Jun Linyuan get angry if she spilled tea all over the memorials? He had to. After all, they were very important documents. Earlier, Fengwu had tried everything she could to set Jun Linyuan off, but to no avail. Now that she had discovered a great opportunity, of course she would make good use of it. At that thought, she approached Jun Linyuan with the tea set and pretended to trip when she was a few steps away. Ah! She cried out, and threw the tea in the direction of the desk. Watch out! Jun Linyuan reached out with his strong arms, but Fengwu didn't want him to catch her, so she turned the other way at the last moment. However, she had no idea that Jun Linyuan would turn as well. Thump! Poor Fengwu. She fell into Jun Linyuan's arms. She almost broke her nose on his chest. She drew in her breath in pain and was almost in tears. However, she was secretly thrilled. Because the memorials were instead soaked with tea, and Jun Linyuan had to be angry. Chapter 1550, Green Spring Vine 3. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Scrambling out of Jun Linyuan's arms, Fengwu feigned a panicked voice when she saw all the water on the desk. All the memorials are soaked. What should I do? Jun Linyuan just watched Fengwu with conflicted feelings. He wondered if she was really worried about the memorials, because she was a really bad actress. He could tell that she wanted to throw herself at him, but instead, she pretended to trip. At that thought, the Crown Prince smiled a little. Just then Fengwu heard the voice in her head. His Royal Highness is 50% happy. Fengwu was thrilled. 50%. It was as high as 50%. She said to the fairy excitedly, Look, Jun Linyuan's angry. He's really mad. That was 50%. But the fairy only gave her a pitying look. That look gave Fengwu the creeps, and she asked in bewilderment, What's wrong? The fairy heaved a long sigh. Are you sure he's angry? Of course he is. I heard it with my own ears. His Royal Highness is 55% happy. She then heard the voice in her head. Feng Wu froze when she heard those words. She stared at the fairy and seemed to be in shock. Happy? He's happy. Only then did she realize that the number referred to Jun Linyuan's happiness instead of anger. But how was that even possible? That's not right. Is there something wrong with the system? Feng Wu stared at the fairy. How can he be happy? The fairy looked sympathetically at Feng Wu. Feng Wu asked, what? The fairy said, the system never makes mistakes. If you think it does, you're wrong. Feng Wu asked, why is Jun Linyuan happy then? The fairy said, you'll have to ask yourself that, my dear young master. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. She was really confused, because she had deliberately made a mess and gotten all the memorials on the table soaked. Shouldn't a normal person get mad? But not only wasn't Jun Linyuan angry, he was actually 50% happy. Was there something wrong with him? What's going on in your head? Seeing the way Feng Wu was staring blankly into the air, Jun Linyuan was amused and jabbed her forehead with a finger. Even someone as smart as Jun Linyuan couldn't predict that Feng Wu was on a mission to acquire her broken star pieces, to say nothing of something as strange as the system of love trials. Startled by Jun Linyuan's flick, she involuntarily put her hand down on the desk. Crashed, but there was suddenly the crisp sound of something hitting the ground. Feng Wu immediately returned to herself and had a bad feeling. And she was right. Feng Wu was shocked when she looked down. That was because the pale blue tea set had fallen to the ground and shattered to pieces. Feng Wu remembered what Granny Gong said earlier. His Royal Highness came across this tea set by accident, and he cherishes it. Spiritual essence comes out of the sides of the cups and condenses into water, which is the best water to make tea with. His Royal Highness has never liked something so much. Chapter 1551. What does Jun Linyuan hate most? Feng Wu's eyes widened as she stared at Jun Linyuan, unsure what to do. Jun Linyuan froze for a split second as well and only returned to himself when he saw the broken tea set. Feng Wu really panicked this time. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. She knew how important the tea set was, so she genuinely felt sorry. The tea set is such a rare treasure. Jun Linyuan has to be furious, Feng Wu thought to herself. But to her astonishment, Jun Linyuan said, that was quite a nice sound. Feng Wu. She stared at Jun Linyuan in disbelief and couldn't think straight for a long while. Shouldn't he get mad and scold her? He should be at least 50% angry. But no, not only wasn't he mad, he had complimented the sound. What kind of person was he? That wasn't what she had expected. What's wrong? Jun Linyuan asked when he saw how shocked Feng Wu was. He remained perfectly calm, as if she had only broken a worthless cup. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. So, this tea set wasn't as precious as Granny Gong said it was? It's nothing. Ahem, Feng Wu waved at him. It's late. I'm off. She dashed off like a nimble fox after that. Jun Linyuan didn't know what to say. After she was gone, Jun Linyuan finally looked at the tea set. Feng Wu ran out of the tent and only let out one breath, when a hand landed on her shoulder. Startled, she put a hand on her chest and turned around. It was Feng Sun. You scared me. Feng Wu smacked him in frustration. Feng Sun laughed. Little Feng Wu, I didn't know you're so jumpy. That's very unexpected. Feng Wu rolled her eyes. Of course she wasn't always so jumpy. It was all because of Jun Linyuan. Now it's getting late. Go get some rest. Feng Sun rubbed Feng Wu's head and turned to leave. Hey, wait. Feng Wu grabbed him by the sleeve. Feng Sun turned around and looked at her in bewilderment. An idea suddenly struck Feng Wu. She didn't know how to set Jun Linyuan off, but Feng Sun grew up with Jun Linyuan, so he should be able to provide her some useful information. At that thought, Feng Wu asked Feng Sun in a serious voice, Can you do me a favor? She seldom spoke to Feng Sun in this way, which made him jump. Why so serious? Feng Wu said, Because it's serious. Throwing an arm over Feng Wu's shoulder, Feng Sun said, You don't have to be so polite. We're siblings, aren't we? How can I help you? Feng Wu looked over her shoulder and saw Jun Linyuan's silhouette in the window, so she immediately led Feng Sun back to her own room. What is it? Why so mysterious? Feng Sun was intrigued. Looking into his eyes, Feng Wu said solemnly, "You have to answer my following questions honestly. Remember, be honest." Rubbing his chin, Feng Sun wondered what he should say if she asked him if he had ever been to a brothel before. How complicated. Chapter 1552. Do you think Boss Jun wants to hold your hand? But what Feng Wu asked was, do you know what Jun Linyuan hates most? Feng Sun said, huh? Feng Wu nodded solemnly. Do you know what Jun Linyuan hates most? What things or people annoy him? Or, what doesn't he like people to do to him? Feng Sun looked Feng Wu up and down with a strange expression on his face. The longer he studied her, the more meaningful the look in his eyes became. Feng Wu smacked him on the head. What on earth are you thinking? Xiao, that's not right. That's not right at all. Feng Sun gave her a half-smile and asked, why do you suddenly care about Boss Jun's preferences? Feng Wu rolled her eyes at him. No, I don't. I'm asking about what he doesn't like. Isn't that the same thing? Feng Sun shrugged. Once you know what he doesn't like, you can avoid it, which is just an indirect way to please him. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. She wasn't planning to avoid it. On the other hand, she was going to do everything to provoke Jun Linyuan. Seeing that Feng Wu wouldn't speak, Feng Sun said, oh my, are you shy? Feng Wu glared at him. Are you going to tell me or not? If not, I'm going to bed. All right, I'll tell you. Feng Sun smiled behind his palm, and his eyes were two crescent moons. He gave Feng Wu a teasing look. Feng Wu said, tell me already. Feng Sun said, I will. Just let me think. He sat down in front of a table, rubbed his chin, and tried to figure out an answer. Things that Boss Jun hates? Well, when it comes to food, he hates spicy things. Feng Wu didn't buy that. Are you sure? On second thought, Feng Sun realized that Boss Jun had eaten all the spicy dishes Feng Wu made and had quite enjoyed them. Fine, that wasn't correct. Feng Sun started thinking again. As for the people Boss Jun hates? Xiao Wu, are you going to kill them to please Boss Jun? Feng Wu raised an eyebrow. What's wrong with that? Feng Sun said, what's wrong with that? Have you forgotten? It's common knowledge that his father is his least favorite person. Feng Wu said, Emperor Wu. Feng Sun rubbed her head and gave her a sympathetic look. You're a very smart girl, but I'm afraid you won't be able to touch His Majesty. Feng Wu felt desperate. What about the things he hates most? For instance, what he doesn't like people to do to him. Feng Sun said matter-of-factly, isn't that obvious? Boss Jun hates it when other people touch him. He's a neat freak and it annoys him when people are even just several meters away. Are you serious? Feng Wu looked suspiciously at Feng Sun. Feng Sun almost jumped to his feet. Of course I am. You have no idea. Anyone who even so much as touches his clothes will get their hands chopped off. Feng Wu lowered her head and murmured, is it that serious? Jun Linyuan was always grabbing her hand or carrying her off. If Feng Sun was telling the truth, she wouldn't have any hands left by now. Feng Sun glanced at Feng Wu and suddenly realized something. Hey, do you think that Boss Jun wants to hold your hand all the time? Chapter 1553. What does His Royal Highness hate? 1. Feng Wu almost lost her temper. No, that's not true. Feng Sun said, alright. He doesn't do it all the time, just occasionally. She stared at Feng Sun but couldn't exactly contradict him. Feng Sun rubbed her head and sounded amused. Silly girl, haven't you realized it? Boss Jun treats you differently. It was like throwing a stone into still water, disturbing Feng Wu's calm mind. However, Feng Wu immediately said, that's right. He treats me differently, because all he ever does is pick on me. Feng Sun smiled wryly. Don't you see it? You're about the only one Boss June likes to pick on. Feng Wu snorted. That's right. I'm his only target. Is it fun, making me his only victim? Feng Sun smiled wryly. That's because he likes you. What? Feng Wu gave Feng Sun a strange look. You're out of your mind. Feng Sun was confused. What? Have you still not realized that Boss June likes you? Feng Wu rolled her eyes at him, finding him ridiculous. Seriously? You don't know? Feng Sun almost jumped to his feet. He ran up to Feng Wu, stared at her, and shouted, Do you mean it? You have no idea? Feng Wu said, Don't say stupid things. How can June Linyuan possibly like me? Feng Sun said, Hey, you just said so yourself, that you're the only one he picks on. Feng Wu rolled her eyes at him. After everything June Linyuan has done to me, you're telling me that it's all because he likes me? Feng Sun said, That's right. Feng Wu said, Go away. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Feng Sun said, Hey, you silly girl. Aren't you supposed to be very smart? Why are you so dumb all of a sudden? Why do you think Boss June wolfs down your spicy dishes when he doesn't actually like spicy food? Feng Wu said, Because my spicy dishes are delicious. Feng Sun said, Then tell me, why do other people get their hands chopped off when they touch Boss June's sleeve, but you get to hold his hand all the time? Feng Wu said, You sound as if I want that to happen. Feng Sun said, Just answer my question. Tilting her head, Feng Wu looked at her soft hands and said, Is it because I have nice hands? Feng Sun didn't know what to say. Fine, you have nice hands, but Boss June's hands are as nice as yours, okay? Feng Wu said, Feng Sun stared at Feng Wu and asked, Why? Answer me. Feng Wu said, How am I supposed to know why? Feng Sun jabbed her forehead with a finger. That's because Boss June likes you, dummy. Feng Wu snorted. Of course she didn't believe that. Seeing that Feng Wu wouldn't believe him, Feng Sun grew agitated. How can you not believe me? I'm telling the truth. Boss June really. Hey! Feng Wu stared at Feng Sun and said, Say that again and I'm not your sister anymore. Seeing that Feng Wu's face had darkened, Feng Sun immediately waved his hand. All right. I won't talk about it anymore. Happy? Feng Wu grunted. You shouldn't talk about it, because you're making everything up. You can say that to me, but if other people hear it, they'll laugh at me. You know perfectly well how mean those people are to me. Feng Sun chuckled. I've been hearing people commenting on you non-stop during this trip. Some are compliments and some is criticism, but most of them have poor judgment. Chapter 1554. What does His Royal Highness hate? 2. More accurately, most people had been criticizing Feng Wu. But they all have their own bias and they're all jealous, so of course they won't say good things about you. Moreover, do you even care what they think? Feng Sun jabbed Feng Wu's head with a finger. My Xiao Wu is a very grumpy girl. Feng Wu was speechless. Everyone likes compliments. I'm not a masochist, of course I don't like being criticized. Feng Sun rubbed her head and found her silly. Wait, I'm not done asking my question yet. Feng Wu poked Feng Sun with a finger. Tell me now. What things don't June Linyuan like other people to do to him? Feng Sun said, What? Boss June hates it when other people don't follow his orders. That was great. Feng Wu immediately took out a notebook to write that down. Seeing that Feng Wu was actually writing it down, Feng Sun didn't know what to say. Despite what she told him about not liking June Linyuan, she was writing everything down for fear that she might miss something. Well, does June Linyuan have things that are his favorite? Like books or stationery? Feng Wu looked up and blinked her big black eyes. Feng Sun rubbed his chin. Boss June is very aloof and isn't attached to most things. You're probably the only person that he actually likes. Hey, Feng Sun. Feng Wu smacked his head. Roar. It was a hard smack and Feng Sun grimaced in pain. Make fun of me again and I'll make you pay. Feng Wu's face darkened. This girl was really... Feng Sun didn't know what Feng Wu was thinking. Sometimes she acted as if she cared a lot about Jun Linyuan, but other times, she couldn't stand the mention of their relationship. How bizarre. Fine, fine. I won't make fun of you. Feng Sun pleaded for forgiveness. If there's something Boss Jun really cares about, I remember that he has this pale blue teacup that he stumbled upon by accident. It's such an amazing teacup. Feng Sun's eyes twinkled as he spoke. Guess what? Spiritual water can come out of the sides of the teacup automatically, and the water contains a dense concentration of spiritual essence, which can greatly help with his cultivation. According to Boss Jun, the teacup contains an exquisite formation. Feng Wu stared at Feng Sun. Thinking that Feng Wu didn't believe him, Feng Sun nodded repeatedly. It's true. Master Dugu asked Boss Jun for the cup once, saying that the spiritual water can help to prolong life, but Boss Jun didn't give it to him. Later, His Majesty heard about its benefit as well and wanted to exchange the cup with a lot of good things, including even a city, but Boss Jun didn't give in. Feng Sun stared at Feng Wu and said, "So, if there's one thing that Boss Jun actually likes, it's that cup." Feng Wu stared at Feng Sun in bewilderment. She could still hear Jun Linyuan's voice in her head. That was quite a nice sound. Jun Linyuan didn't get mad when the cup shattered. Instead, he said it sounded nice. Had the man lost his mind? Feng Wu stood there in a trance-like state and her head was completely blank. She felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't tell what it was. She couldn't remember what Feng Sun said afterward. All she could think about was that cup. Chapter 1555, Seed of Spirit Source, 1. Maybe that cup just didn't mean that much to Jun Linyuan. That had to be the case. The journey resumed early the next morning, because Lord Mu brought them the news that they would arrive at the Sino grassland later that evening. The announcement excited everyone. The team consisted of so many wealthy people who were used to living comfortably, and none of them wanted to spend their days camping out in the open. "Get in here." Sitting in his carriage, the Crown Prince fixed his gaze on Feng Wu. Immediately, all eyes were on Feng Wu. Even Feng Sun gave Feng Wu a meaningful look. Feng Wu recalled what Feng Sun told her the night before about how Jun Linyuan hated it when people didn't follow his orders. So, she stared at Jun Linyuan and snorted. "No, I won't." While everyone around them stared at Feng Wu in bewilderment. Had the girl lost her mind? His Royal Highness had invited her into his carriage, which was an incredible honor. All the girls around them felt so jealous that they ground their teeth. But what did Feng Wu do? She shook her head arrogantly and said no. Why would anyone waste such a great opportunity? However, after their initial astonishment, their conclusion was that Feng Wu was doomed. His Royal Highness hated it the most when other people didn't obey his orders, and Feng Wu had just turned him down in front of everyone. Immediately, a strange atmosphere filled the air. Everyone held their breaths and were too scared to even cough for fear that they might draw His Royal Highness's attention and bring trouble down on themselves. However, to their disbelief, Jun Linyuan only glanced at Feng Wu before dropping the door curtain. Just like that. It was as if nothing had happened. And the crowd was speechless. Was that something His Royal Highness would do? Since when did the heartless and unapproachable Crown Prince become so mild and good-tempered? "Your Royal Highness, forget about that defiant Feng Wu. Let me serve you." It was a girl from the Murong family. She was 15 to 16 years of age and was already very pretty. Standing there, she looked very attractive when she smiled. Immediately, everyone gave Murong Yen envious looks. How brave! And she was so good at seizing the opportunity. That was very clever of her. Now that His Royal Highness needed an out, Miss Murong showed up at the right time with the proper excuse. That way, she would be able to stay with His Royal Highness. Once they figured that out, they looked at Murong Yen in a different way. Murong Yen was very satisfied with herself. She praised herself for the smart move. When she was still dreaming about getting close to Jun Linyuan and replacing Feng Wu, go away. She heard the voice that rang out from behind the drawn curtain nearby. She was only a few steps from the carriage, and that was as far as she could go. She then flew backward like a kite on a cut string. Everyone was shocked. Murong Yanyan herself was astonished as well. She flew backward and smashed into the ground, dumbfounded from beginning to end. Sister! Murong Yanxi cried out, ran up to Murong Yanyan, and held her in her arms. Only then did Murong Yanyan realize what had happened, and she burst into tears. Chapter 1556, Seed of Spirit Source, 2. Everyone around them gave Murong Yanyan strange looks. It was common knowledge that the crown prince was heartless and unapproachable, but Murong Yanyan wouldn't accept the reality and just had to try his patience. She finally learned her lesson. Miss Murong, sorry about that, but you breached His Royal Highness's safe zone. Feng came out at that moment, looking as indifferent as ever. His Royal Highness's safe zone. Everyone stared at Feng and didn't know what to say. How long had Feng Wu hung around His Royal Highness? Not only did the Crown Prince hold her hand, he even carried her around. Why wasn't Feng Wu kicked away? Fighting back her tears, Murong Yanyan said in an accusing voice, but why can Feng Wu be there? By her. Because she was Feng Wu. Next to them, Granny Gong smirked. Feng said quietly, Miss Feng Wu is His Royal Highness's maid at the moment. That's why. I can be His Royal Highness's maid too. Let me be a maid. After what happened, Murong Yanyan still wouldn't acknowledge her mistake. What an idiot. Did she think that His Royal Highness would take just any random person as his maid? Who did she think she was? Feng Wu? Granny Gong gave Murong Yanyan an indifferent glance. However, Murong Yanyan knew nothing about it. Right now, she was looking at Feng with a pleading look in her eyes. Feng gave Murong Yanyan a sympathetic look. He had lost count of the number of infatuated girls he had seen around the Crown Prince, but after all these years, Feng Wu was the only girl who was special. He then glanced at Granny Gong. Granny Gong immediately got the hint and stepped out. Miss Murong, sorry about that. Granny Gong's voice was indifferent and aloof. Please follow me. Granny Gong was very well known among the noble ladies in the imperial capital. Although Murong Yanyan was the daughter of a noble family, she was still intimidated by the authoritative Granny Gong. Granny Gong then took Murong Yanyan to Mrs. Murong. The lady hadn't heard about what happened earlier, and she smiled when she saw Granny Gong. Granny Gong, what? However, Granny Gong cut her off before she could say another word. My lady, we're setting out soon, so I'll be brief. Your third daughter is quite reckless, and I'm afraid you'll have to discipline her more often. If your daughter still insists on becoming a maid in the Crown Prince's residence even after thorough consideration, it's possible to make that happen. However, she'll have to sign an indenture contract to sell herself to us should she decide to do so. My lady, I hope you won't feel too sad. Granny Gong turned to leave without any hesitation after saying those words. Before Murong Yanyan could say a word, her mother slapped her so hard that she almost cried. What on earth was that about? Murong Yanyan, explain. The members of the Murong family weren't the only ones who were shocked. Even the rest of the crowd. They all felt conflicted. They had thought that this trip would be a great opportunity for them to get closer to the Crown Prince, especially the young ladies. However, seeing what happened to Murong Yanyan, a lot of people were frightened. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.